through a little bit.
Sorry. You guys ready? What? Okay.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to say it out loud.
It's true. The people are good. The government. Is that all right? Trying to do the same thing. Yeah, you have that. This doesn't show up. He angled the table like this. They were asked to do that.
Can you maybe move that, yeah. Can you move that in?
Good evening. How are you?
How are you doing?
Doing well, Antonio. Pleasure.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you so much for being here. When I testify, I got this list over here. That's how we know when you testify and first come first in order. If you need Spanish translation, please also come over to the speaker and we'll get you set up with a headset. Si necesita traducción en español, por favor, véanos en esta mesa y en lo demás, si se cerrado.
Councilman first and second.
Oh, he's first?
Either way, I'm not gonna abandon you once I finish reading. We're gonna stick together.
Everybody ready? Hello? Good evening and welcome to today's hearing of the Charter Revision Commission of the City of New York, established pursuant to Local Law 91 of 2018. I am Gail Benjamin, and I'm honored to lead the commission as chair. It is my pleasure to call the meeting to order. I would like to recognize that we are joined by the following commissioners. To my left, or your right, is Steve Fiella. Seated next to him is Jim Karras. Seated next to Jim is Jimmy Vaca. Seated next to Commissioner Vaca is Commissioner Hirsch, Allison Hirsch. And seated next to her is Lindsay Green, directly to my left. Directly to my right is Commissioner Lisette Camilla. Seated to her right is Commissioner Paula Gavin. Seated to her right is Commissioner Sal Albanese. And last but not least is Commissioner Satish Nuri. And next to Commissioner Nuri is Commissioner Carl Weisbrod. Seeing that we have a quorum, we will start the meeting. This is the second public hearing in our ongoing effort to engage the public in the generation of ideas
If the live stream is
to engage the public in the generation of ideas about ways in which the city charter can help the city work better. This commission was established by legislation adopted by the City Council and has appointments from each of the borough presidents, the public advocate, the comptroller, the City Council, and the mayor. We, the 15 of us, represent a cross-section of New Yorkers. We live throughout the 5 boroughs, we work in diverse fields, we have diverse backgrounds, ages, and means. But what we share is a love of our city and a desire to help shape our city's future and to meaningfully participate in changing the document that will provide the basis for that task. Given that you're here today, I know that you are already aware of the importance of the Charter in how we live our everyday lives in the city. The Charter provides the manner in which the city handles public money and provides goods and services to residents throughout the city. It defines the responsibilities of government officials as well as those of our city agencies, and it provides the framework for the use and development of land in the city. We're all here tonight to propose ideas that can strengthen the compact between citizens and their government. Ideas that can provide a transition from the city of 1989 to the city of 2050. These ideas may rebalance the rights and responsibilities of our agencies or our government officials. They may strengthen our budget process or may redefine how the city uses its land or purchases its goods and services. We welcome all of your ideas and thank you for sharing them. If you wish to testify today, please fill out a speaker's slip and submit it to one of the staff. Please make your points clearly and succinctly, as we want to understand the issues you raise. We're also happy to accept any written testimony you may have, either today or over the course of the coming weeks and months. Our web address and Twitter feed is on the pamphlets located on the table and are spread throughout the room. All testimony, in whatever form you choose to submit it, will be included in the record and made available to the commissioners, to the staff, and to the public. We will also hold Twitter and telephone town halls in the coming months to provide more opportunities to hear from you. We hope to gather a robust set of proposals and will be conducting additional hearings in the spring to present the results of our research and analysis and receive further feedback. By September of 2019, we will share with you a set of revisions to the Charter, which will be put before all of you on the ballot in November of 2019. Again, we thank you for being here and taking part in this momentous task. As our first order of business, however, I will entertain a motion to adopt the minutes of the Commission's September 12th public hearing, which have been previously provided to the Commissioners and are available in draft form on the Commission's website. Do I hear a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. We will now hear testimony from the public on proposals for revisions to the city charter. We will limit testimony to 3 minutes per individual in order to ensure that we can hear from everyone who wishes to speak. After you testify, members of the Commission may have questions for you to follow up on your ideas or the proposals you've made. For the first panel, I call up City Council Member Antonio Reynoso and Dr. Susan Williams. Council Member Reynoso.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the Charter Revision Commission. Thank you for your service, first and foremost, and for this opportunity to testify here today. I'm Councilmember Antonio Reynoso, and I will be testifying on behalf of the City Council's Progressive Caucus on priorities for the Commission's consideration. While the City Council has amended the Charter from time to time, this is the first time a Charter Commission has convened through our legislative authority. We welcome all possibilities of topics that will be considered to this Commission. However, in this series of hearings, we will be focusing on the city's land use powers and process, which has wide-reaching effects on critical issues affecting the city, including affordable housing, displacement, homelessness, fair share, and equity, infrastructure, and growth. This issue is a priority for the 22 members of our caucus who represent districts across the 5 boroughs of New York City. It is no secret that the city's land use and planning process are deeply fraught. Controversies and oppositions to recent rezonings have made quite evident that New Yorkers, grassroots organizers, elected officials, and skilled practitioners alike share deep concerns about the lack of transparency, community engagement, and equity evident in our land use processes and outcomes. New York City's approach to planning has been primarily reactive for decades. The current system encourages ad hoc planning, in which the city positions itself to be strictly reactive to private development proposals. Devastating hurricanes, urgent needs for school seats, waste transfer stations, and other infrastructure needs. This reactive approach even extends itself to perhaps our most pressing crisis, housing and homelessness. We believe there's a better way. Now more than ever, we are experiencing growth and change on a level not seen in the first half of the 20th century. If we are truly going to be a city that values equity, a city that reflects the needs and priorities of its citizens, we cannot continue to take a piecemeal approach to planning our collective future. Low-income communities should not be solely responsible for bearing the brunt of new density or infrastructure for a growing city. With this commission, we have an obligation to shift our planning processes away from short-term political goals and towards long-term planning that accounts for realities of climate change and needs of a growing coastal city. We need to reimagine how land use decisions are made to empower communities in the planning process to advance the equitable distribution of city resources, facilities, and new development. As a first step, the caucus set forth guiding principles that reflect the caucus's values and will drive the development of recommendations moving forward. Equity and fairness, to ensure all communities are doing their fair share and have equitable access to affordable housing, city services and amenities, and a healthy environment in which to live, work, and raise their families. Proactive and responsible plans that account for projected growth and existing conditions and infrastructure needs. Robust and inclusive engagement to ensure that all New Yorkers have a voice in our planning decision, regardless of language, age, income, ability, gender, religion, color, race, or ethnicity. Resiliency and sustainability to guard against the future impacts of climate change and mitigate the adverse impacts they bring.
Councilmember, could you
Wrap it up? Oh, my.
start to...
Okay. I'm going to go
That's a
towards
little
the
more
end.
than 3 minutes.
It's okay. I'll submit it in writing
That would
for
be
you all
great.
to review, and I'll be meeting with you
Okay.
individually as well. But our current system does not provide an avenue in which to have honest conversations about our city's needs. Much of it is done out of the public eye, with outcomes revealed and often negotiated just before a final vote. We have tried this method for long enough to know it's not working. It is time we manifest our progressive rhetoric through proactive planning work that is not guided by the latest real estate speculation, but by data, local input, a commitment to right past inequities and projected long-term needs. Over the next several months, we'll be refining the proposals we have laid out today alongside our colleagues and stakeholders. Again, thank you to the commissioners for your time. We look forward to working with you, our colleagues at the council, and key stakeholders to refine recommendations that reflect the principles that achieve the goals we have outlined here today. Again, thank you to the commission for your time.
Thank you. Can we have a copy of that?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions? Sal? Can I do one thing first, Sal? I'd like to recognize that Reverend Clinton Miller and Ed Cordero, Commissioner Cordero, have joined us. And we have previously voted on accepting the minutes from the last meeting of September 19th. Would you like to join us in approving them? Commissioner Miller? Yes? And Commissioner Cordero?
Yes.
Thank you. Sal?
Thanks for coming in, council member.
Thank you, Sal.
Do we have the specific proposals laid out at this point?
No, we don't. We have the basic principles that we want to set forth. We're going to actually start engaging in a more inclusive and robust conversation with stakeholders, local community stakeholders, to more deeply refine our recommendations. But a lot of what we're going to be pushing forward is actually something that I've been able to produce alongside Gail Brewer, our Great Borough President of Manhattan, in Inclusive Cities Report, which you will also have, that I will submit to the commission for record.
I would urge you to get the refining process down as quickly as possible, because time is of the essence.
Yes, I agree.
We have hearings in the spring, so as soon as you get that done, I think we would all love to review it.
Absolutely. We'll be getting it done as soon as possible.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, council member. And
Thank you.
I am told that I did not mention that you could also go to our link on Twitter in order to give us materials or to tell us what you are thinking. Dr. Williams?
Good evening. I'm representing the Legislative Working Group of the Campaign for an Elected Civilian Review Board. I'm also a retired physician and former delegate of Doctors Council, SEIU. I want to address several questions that were raised on September 12th. First, would the Elected Civilian Review Board provide due process for accused police officers? Yes. Due process is explicitly included and guaranteed. Second question was asked, does the proposed DCRB infringe on police officers' right of collective bargaining? No, it doesn't. But to clarify, police officers are already precluded by law from addressing disciplinary procedures in their contract negotiations. The court determined in 1994 that disciplinary measures as outlined in the City Charter Section 434 and in the Administrative Code Section 14-115 could not be superseded by contract demands. These two sections are included in the changes that we are proposing to the City Charter to create the Elected Civilian Review Board. Question regarding the special prosecutors. Aren't district attorneys established under state law? The answer is yes, but our reading of that legislation does not preclude the creation of a special prosecutor in addition. Our intent is that they would handle all crimes against persons, including sexual assault, rape, battery, in addition to murder, which is the only thing covered under the Governor and Attorney General's appointee. Other criminal cases, such as, for example, the publicized case of officers arrested last week for drug dealing and corruption, those would still be under the purview of the district attorney. As you requested, we will be providing you with key documents and online links to our research. And among these are studies of nationwide civilian review boards that have shown that there are systemic flaws that have made it impossible for these boards to meet their goal of true police accountability. But you can actually learn this from talking to New Yorkers, as we have on the streets. They will attest that young people of color are still being arrested to meet quotas. There's ongoing racial profiling. Women are subjected to sexual harassment and assault. People are targeted for investigation based on their religious or political beliefs, and community activists and union strikers and picketers are subjected to intimidation and trampling of free speech rights. The existing status quo has not held police accountable. Will the Elected Civilian Review Board be a panacea for this? No, it won't. But it will be a huge step forward toward improving the lives of New Yorkers, and it is doable. Moreover, it is this commission that has the only power to enact it during the coming year by putting it on the ballot for November of 2019. And our question to you is, do you recognize that there is indeed a problem with police misconduct, and are you willing to step up toward providing solutions for it? Thank you.
Any questions? Seeing none? Thank you both very much.
Okay.
No questions, really?
The next speaker is Jabari Brisport from the Democratic Socialists of America and Ronald Martin.
Come up first. I'll take more time.
And we're, if I may take a minute, we're joined by Commissioner Merrill Tisch. Commissioner Tisch, we have previously voted on adopting the minutes from the meeting last week. Would you like to vote in favor? Thank you. Okay. Mr. Brisport,
Yep.
the floor is yours.
Okay. I'd like to start by saying good evening, commissioners, and thank you for your time tonight. My name is Jabari Brisport. I'm representing the Racial Justice Working Group of the Democratic Socialists of America. I'm a school teacher, and I'm testifying tonight also in support of the Elected Civilian Review Board. I remember marching about 3.5 years ago because I was angry. I was furious that Eric Garner had been murdered and that Daniel Pantaleo had not been indicted. marched through Times Square up into Harlem. We were shouting, no justice, no peace. We shouted, I can't breathe. It's been about 3.5 years, and there has still been no indictment, and in fact, Daniel Pantaleo still has a job. I believe that sends two messages. To those who are tasked with protect and serve, the city has your back. To everyone else, the city hears your concerns, your frustrations. It hears them. As for acting on them, that's another story. We've all heard the Build Your Block ads on the radio. They play them ad nauseum. But at some point, we need more than conversation. Our communities need to be heard, yes, and thank you to those of you for facilitating those conversations. But our communities also need power. They need agency. They need to be able to vote on who polices the police. I don't know a single person who doesn't wish for better relationships between communities and the police they serve. But I also know it's very hard to trust an institution when you feel powerless against it. I think New Yorkers need a voice in how we interact with police, and not just an auditory one, but a physical one as well, a ballot. And that's why I support the campaign for an elected civilian review board. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you. Excuse me. Mr. Martin.
Chairman Benjamin, members of the 2019 New York City Charter Revision Commission, thank you for this opportunity to present what I am very confident is going to be the best proposal for the New York City Charter that you will encounter during your preliminary round of public presentations. The entire New York City Charter needs to be reordered from beginning to end. The system is disorganized, and any effective adjustment has the potential to adversely affect another area of the government that was not foreseen because of the lack of order in the Charter's design. Research and development of my revolutionary ideas leads me to recognize that government charters are somewhat like computer programs, and that they need to be created with a format and built up using strict language and syntax structure. Although our founding fathers were more sophisticated intellectuals than their contemporaries, and subsequent generations of politicians and statesmen have tried to adjust the charters towards a more just organization of the government, ultimately they did not have the necessary technology. They only had one simple formula to work with, and although it accurately divides the government into 3 parts, what they did not have was a formula for the subsequent divisions of those 3 parts. And subsequently, what we have now is a semi-chaotic mess, politely referred to as political gridlock, that trickles down in the form of corruption, hypocrisy, hysteria, frustration, criminality, and violence. Although we enjoy a better standard of living than most others, we maintain a skewed aversion to the approach to social justice and tranquility. The last 6 months of charter revision hearings has revealed that most of the citizens are apathetic. Otherwise, the hearings would have made headlines. The unfiltered testimony that has been presented at the hearings reveals that some citizens are motivated, but oblivious to the underlying reason for these public hearings. You are looking for solutions in the form of directive systems that can be inserted into the charter that would make your job much easier. The problem is the average lawyer, much less the average citizen, doesn't seem to understand that need. It is a poorly understood process and nothing like our romantic legends of American history that only reveal the highlights. The guide that is published by the state for revising city charters provides a decent outline of a charter, but the guide does not direct the commissions as to how to build the system of directives that make up the content of the charter. And basically, what that leaves the revision commissions in a state of wonderment as to how it is all going to work. Although I have no formal background in government, I have designed a charter that is a much better guide than the state guide. My charter provides an outline similar to the state guide, and it guides the commission to make rules for organizing a charter convention that builds the content of the outline using the citizens to do a lot of the work. I figured it all out, and I have been developing this system over the past 10 years, and it can be referred to as the Brooklyn Plan. The Brooklyn Plan organizes a convention, which is a
Excuse me,
test
Mr.
run
Martin?
of the legislative
You do know the
system
bill.
to advance the charter to serviceability. Thank you for this honor to present the Brooklyn Plan on this day, September 17th, in this, the 393rd year of the incorporation of New York and the 242nd year of the independence of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Do you have the outline with you about which you speak that we could look at?
I have a more complete one, abridged, you might say, and the complete will be on the website.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Located on the bottom of the pages.
And that website is secularlibrary.com?
Or us4cc.info.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there questions? Thank you, Mr. Oh, yes, Ms. Gavin.
So a simple question, but complex at the same time, is how would you measure success of a revised charter?
Less protests, less rioting, probably, yeah, less protests. You'd see less of that. I'm not going to go into specific ones.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Martin and Mr. Brisboard.
Thank you.
And now we have John F. Manning and Ed Jaworski. I'm sorry. Okay. Mr. Manning?
My name is John Manning. I am a civil servant and a resident of Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. I am speaking as a concerned citizen on the pressing need for campaign finance and lobbying reform, how this issue is the root cause of many other problems, and to ask the Charter Revision Commission to consider democracy vouchers as a viable, realistic alternative to the status quo. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this evening. The American system of government and politics has been defined by the principle of the people, by the people, for the people. Our system has been a work in progress since its inception. That principle still guides us. In order to address the shortcomings of our system today, we have to recognize the major problem that is hindering the further improvement of our democratic process. The corrupting influence, the perniciousness of big money in campaign finance and public policy making. The difficulty of running for office without accepting large sums of bundled money from special interests and lobbying firms prevents honest and competent people from being elected. The seemingly unchallengeable power of the real estate industry in New York City and state government is just one of many examples of how our democratic process has been thoroughly corrupted. The lobbying industry, as it currently exists, is nothing less than legalized bribery. The mayor, governor, our city council members, and our state legislators are supposed to be wrestling with representing the interests of their constituents and doing what is best for the society as a whole. They should not be responding to whichever lobby donates the greatest amount of money to their campaigns or what special interest dangles lucrative post-government employment in front of them. That corruption, fraud, and pay-to-play have become so pervasive in New York government is just one of the many negative effects created by our campaign finance and lobbying laws. What can the Charter Revision Commission do? If every registered voter were allocated 4 democracy vouchers worth $50 each to give to the candidates of their choice, It would encourage high voter turnout and enable well-meaning people of modest means to run for office. This is currently being done in Seattle, Washington. Democracy vouchers are not a radical idea. They are a common-sense solution. What is outrageous is that we allow dishonest but powerful people to control our political system. Democracy vouchers, limiting other campaign donations to small amounts, and ending third-party donations from lobbying firms and bundlers could cause the current political climate of cynicism and complacency to be replaced with idealism, leadership, and community involvement. It is horrible that in many local elections, 10% voter turnout is the norm. Voter turnout should be 60% regularly. Democracy vouchers and an end to large... I'll wrap it up very quick. And an end to large and bundled donations will open up our political process, giving voters better choices. It will enable school teachers, police officers, small business owners, retirees, all kinds of citizens who care about their communities to run for office or otherwise get involved in civic affairs. The City of New York, being the national leader of honest, competent, good government and real progressiveness, has happened before. When Fiorello LaGuardia took the oath of office as mayor on January 1, 1934, the city's finances were a mess and corruption had practically been official policy. His name became synonymous with government of, by, and for the people.
Mr. Manning?
Let's end the grip that big money has on our noble democratic process. Please amend the New York City Charter to create democracy vouchers and end large bundled and third-party donations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manning. Sal, would you like to... your
I
former
couldn't have said it better myself. And thank you for coming out, Mr. Manning. And I want you to know that Borough President Adams, who appointed me to this commission, is very supportive of democracy vouchers. And as you pointed out, we're not reinventing the wheel here. Seattle has that in place. And, of course, we do know that Connecticut, Arizona, Vermont, and Maine have significantly better campaign finance laws than we have in New York City, where we're plagued with pay-to-play. So thank you for your testimony, and I'll convey that to the Borough President as well.
Thank you.
Allison?
Hi, thank you so much for your testimony. My understanding, having looked into Seattle just a little bit, is that democracy vouchers did in fact increase the number of low-wage workers who were able to participate in their the elections in their district that accepted democracy vouchers. So it's an excellent, I think I would agree, it's an excellent program. The one difference, though, between New York City and Seattle is that Seattle doesn't have, currently, as far as I understand, an existing public financing system. So do you have a sense of how the democracy voucher program would interplay with the existing 6-to-1, or if the Mayor's Charter Revision Commission passes 8-to-1 public financing program?
The details of it are going to require a lot of working out, of course, but I like the idea. You know, to run for city council or state assembly, you need to have between 100,000 and 250,000. To run a serious campaign for mayor, you need 10 million. If there are 2.5 registered voters or so in the city, if every one of them were allocated $100, $200 to give. I may be a liberal Democrat, but I'm impressed with the Republican candidate. I may be a Republican, but the left-wing guy, I saw him at a town hall meeting. He impresses me. He's honest. He's sincere. It would really open this process up. What we have right now, the Real Estate Board of New York, the General Contractors Association, the lobbying industry, we might as well not have a democracy. You know, it is just ridiculous what we currently have.
Just a quick follow-up question. Thank you very much. Would democracy vouchers be limited to registered voters, or would all residents be? Like
I like the idea of registered voters. It's not hard to register and to vote. I think it would encourage people to register. So I like it eliminating, and anybody can register. When I was a child a long time ago, I remember when my mother was voting, having to wait online for half an hour. I mean, we had 50, 60% voter turnout decades ago.
Yeah, Just
Ms. Al?
Allison, just on your question, in Seattle, anyone who can contribute to a campaign will receive vouchers. That's the way it works. And one of the great things about New York City is that we already allocated a significant amount of money through the matching system, which I consider to be inadequate. So we've already allocated money for it. Seattle didn't have a system before, so they had to figure out where the money comes from. We have those resources already in play. As I said, I think it's the gold. I know I'm sort of biased here. It's the gold standard of campaign.
Tell us what you really think, Sal. Mr. Jaworski? Oh, I'm sorry.
I think Satish had a question.
Satish, Commissioner Nuri?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Manning. Two questions. One is, what would prevent people from bundling these vouchers? And number two is, what is the link? I'm failing to see the link between a voucher and turnout. Is there a link there?
It is not within our power to create a perfect God-created situation. What we can do is radically improve the situation where our government is for sale and we have 10 to 20% voter turnout. We can't move away from that.
I can answer that question.
If Mr. Nuri would like you to answer it?
Yeah, the way it works. The way it works in Seattle is that they've got very stringent anti-corruption measures in place, and to make sure that that doesn't happen. People go to jail if they do that, as they do here in New York City when they fraudulently set up straw donors. The same process is in play. And what's good about the Seattle system is how does it increase turnout? It increases turnout because if you live in the pink houses and you're earning $30,000 a year and you have 4 democracy vouchers, you become somebody that elected officials will reach out to. And I'm running for office. I would love your support. If you live in a ritzier part of the city, you have the same 4 vouchers. At this juncture, if you live in the pink houses, if you live in some of the poor areas of the city, no one's reaching out to you. And basically, unfortunately, the money follows the policy.
Sal, I think you're editorializing a little now.
Well, yes, I am. But that's the way. You're forced to engage with regular people. You're not forced to, but you can for the same value as you would by calling. I mean, I talk about this from experience. I ran for office. I know what it's like. You get on the phone with deep-pocketed folks. You don't really reach out to your average individual. The Seattle system does that.
Thank you. Reverend Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Jaworski, for your testimony, especially.
Mr. Manning.
Mr. Manning, I'm sorry. For your testimony, especially in this climate where there's a crisis in affordable housing. And also thank you for your handout, which suggests that the city has not aggressively collected hundreds of millions of dollars in fines. How does this relate with bringing to pass democracy vouchers?
In Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana.
I'm sorry. I have the wrong handout. I'm sorry.
Well, that's right. In Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma, the oil companies tell the local politicians what to do quite often. Here in New York City, the real estate industry, just go to the Campaign Finance Board's website, and there were just, in last year's election, between Mr. de Blasio, Reform Democrat Sal Albanese, and Conservative Republican Nicole Malliotakos, the general public had 3 clear, distinct choices to select from. Mr. de Blasio had $10 million. He was just in a completely different league. He couldn't be, if you're going to run for office, you got to get your message out for people. You got to mail flyers. You got to have TV ads. People are not going to vote for something they don't know or haven't heard about. And we have elections to let the people decide. And it's as far as affordable housing and the whole real estate situation here in New York is concerned, the really powerful, I'm not one for conspiracy theories, but the really powerful real estate interests and Rebbe, they essentially control our democratic process. I don't think I'm being unreasonable to make that statement. And I think that if you could run for city council, the state legislature for mayor. With the democracy vouchers, it would just give people choices. It would open up the process and would defeat the lobbyists.
Commissioner Green?
I have a follow-up question. You talked a lot about the costs to put on an election. Are democracy vouchers a tool that, I guess, I would love to hear you elaborate on how you think democracy vouchers would lower that cost, or is it that you just anticipate the city government, municipal government would step up and fund more of that cost as opposed to external parties?
The bottom line here, we need to have a level playing field, and we need to give the people choices. Let the people decide what's going to happen, and democracy vouchers are a way of public financing of campaigns. But if you and two other candidates were running for something, just the amount of the budget that you have is in the same league, in the same category, you're able to mailing flyers to everybody within the district or the city. That costs a lot of money. TV ads, that costs a lot of money. And this is like the fundamental problem as far as our political system. All these other issues we talk about, I wish there wasn't this form of unfairness. I wish there wasn't that form of unfairness. By getting the big money and power and control out of our process, we're going to be able to address a lot of other things, corruption, fraud.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Commissioner Karras?
Thank you. I'm not extremely familiar with the democracy voucher system. Is it or in Seattle, or what you envision, is it a voluntary system, or is this the only system that there is?
Well, it's a relatively new thing, but basically, I'm a registered voter. Okay, it's the election season, and I'm allocated 4 vouchers worth $50 each. I can give them all to you, or I can give one each to the 4 of you there. I can give it to a conservative candidate, a left-wing candidate. I can give it to anybody I want to.
But I mean, from the point of view of the candidate, do they have to be in this system, or can a candidate self-fund, for example? Like we've had so many officials who have self-funded.
Yeah, Mr. Bloomberg, he just brought up the whole political process in New York City. In Bay Ridge, he was Archie Bunker with an MBA. In Park Slope, he was the big flaming liberal. And everywhere he went, his checkbook was open, I don't think that's what our founding fathers envisioned. Let the people decide who they want to represent them, and you can't have freedom of the press if you don't own a typewriter.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Jaworski.
Good evening. Ed Jaworski, President, Madison Marine Homecrest Civic Association. We're at the Brooklyn's Southern End Community Board 15. I gave you all on the green sheet a little summary of some of the figures that I'll be referring to. Civic leaders like me have long been concerned that the real estate development interests hold the keys to the city. And so it was heartening to see the story 2 weeks ago in the Daily News, Wall Street Journal, Associated Press, Time, Newsweek, Crain's, and elsewhere exposing the fact that there's some $1.5 billion in unpaid New York City fines, including 500,000 building violations by the Kushner Company. Indeed, New York City has nearly $1 billion in unpaid Department of Building Environmental Control Board violations, including $235 million written off, according to figures I obtained via FOIL from the New York City's Oath Office. You see those figures there. A clause in the city charter allows uncollected fines to be written off after 8 years. That's the Environmental Control Board chapter, and I note the paragraph there. the specific sentence. One sentence says, "A judgment entered pursuant to this paragraph shall remain in full force and effect for 8 years." While not granting permits on the local law 47 of 2016 and recent BSA reforms should help, I and other civic leaders suggest that this write-off clause be eliminated from the city charter. Because of the Department of Finance's failure to collect ECB fines associated with the building's violations, they will continue. Thereby, this endangers the public, often results in tragedies, and denies a significant revenue source to benefit residents, as long as the violations can be ignored and fines are eventually erased. The fines should remain in full force and effect till satisfied in full. Also needed is the consequence of a lien to prevent the sale of the property and ultimately pay the debt upon sale, along with some interest accumulating annually. Further, any attempt to legalize or recommend legalizing the violations through any city agency should be denied. We hear those dollar and a dream commercials for lotteries. Stop dreaming. You have access right now to a real $1 billion to help our real estate taxes, keep our real estate taxes in check, and so much more. In doing research on this clause, the write-off clause, obviously it was probably put in by RIBNY, forced by RIBNY. The state authorized the change in 1984 charter revision. I have not, in spite of a lot of calls and research, including to folks like Eric Lane, a past director of city charter revision, while he was dean of the Hospital Law School, to some other professors, I have not been able to find out anything about the history of this thing, the context of the actual authorization, and how the logic of erasing a DOB fine is justified if the legal condition continues. It's simply a concession to RIBNY, as is everything else. Thank you.
Commissioner Vaca?
I thank you for bringing this up. I spoke at your association, has to be 12 years ago,
Right.
11 years ago.
I remember you saying you write down things as you drive along.
I write down problems as I drive along. But I will say that I tend to agree with you that we should eliminate the 8-year limit. But unfortunately, our city is unable or unwilling to collect this debt if you gave them 20 years.
Right.
This has been a documented problem for as long as I can remember, that we have money we cannot collect or will not collect, whether we're incompetent or whether we just don't want the money. I don't get it. But I do think eliminating this clause and looking at the charter, perhaps through charter language, we can force the city to get its act together in this age of technology. Not being able to collect these fines is unconscionable, and it means that the fines we levy don't mean the paper they're written on half the time, because those that we're fining know that we can't collect. So I would want to explore that, and I thank you for bringing this up. It's an important topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Allison? Sorry, you're next, Meryl.
Sorry. Thank you so much. Do you have any sense with I appreciate the geographic breakdown here, but the breakdown of who is incurring the fine? So I feel like there's a difference between the Kushner companies and an individual homeowner who may have lost his job or her job and has a challenge in paying a bill. Do you have a sense of what the breakdown is in terms of these fines?
I don't have a breakdown on it. I've tried to get some information about this. To tell you the truth, I mean, the thing that brought this to the forefront, and I've been beating my head against the wall, God bless you, for quite a while, even at the ZQA MIH hearings. I said, how can you talk about rezoning when you can't enforce the current zoning laws? And it's not, and it wasn't until Kushner's problems came to forefront, and they're just talking about $500,000 on a Kushner company. I have seen six-figure problems. $200,000 a couple of blocks from me, another $200,000 plus on a single-family house in Manhattan Beach area of Brooklyn. So it's not the $100, the $1,000. There are a lot of 5- and 6-figure folks out there, and that's not just the big companies. It's some individual single-family house construction guys. Now, I defy you. Do you remember the crane collapse on the Upper East Side several years ago? 7 people were killed. You go try to Google that address, okay, and find out. And there were big headlines about, he's going to be fined and so forth. The front of the page of the New York Times. Those fines were never collected. And I defy you to go into the DOB's BIS site right now to find what the status of his fines are right now. You know what you won't do? You won't even find the address in there. They've changed the address of the building. So you have to do a lot of homework to find the new address. And you'll find out that his fines were never paid, in spite of the fact that 7 people were killed.
I want to say, Allison asked my question, but I also want to say, I've lived in the city for 63 years. Every day you learn something new. That is it's really something. And I would, like Allison, I'd like to know the details behind the data. And I think data tells us a lot.
We haven't been able to find him. Tony Avella is trying to draft a bill. I don't know what the status is going to be now since he wasn't reelected. And his folks were trying to get some information on the history. He couldn't get it. This is just a few weeks ago. I was at a BSA hearing back in the spring. Sergeant DeVert.
The Board of Standards and Appeals.
Board of Standards and Appeals. And they were looking for an extension of a variance. And the chair of the BSA, Marge Perlmutter, said to the attorney for the applicant, okay, the community is complaining about the site looks like a jungle, and he's got tens of thousands of dollars in fine. She said, I'm going to give you 30 days to clear up the site and to pay the fines. And then I stood up and I said, are you aware of the write-off clause? And she there was a young staffer there, went into his computer and she says, yeah. He says, there are going to be a couple more fines written off pretty soon. So she turned around and she said to them, you got 24 hours to pay the fines. Good. So they weren't even aware at the BSA.
If I can say one thing, okay.
Carl?
I agree this is an appalling situation. I have just a couple of questions about what exactly you're proposing. Are you proposing that the requirement that all fines be cleared after 8 years be eliminated and leave discretion to reduce fines in cases where a not-for-profit is acquiring the building or a single homeowner is trying to save a building? I'm just a little unclear about what you're proposing.
I think the write-off clause should be taken out. You could extend it, and Tony Avella's his original draft was, extended out to 20 years. That doesn't help. I mean, someone from the finance department explained to us, if we don't collect it in the first year or two, we just don't collect it, because now with their eight-year write-off clause, after 2 years have passed and they haven't collected, well, we're halfway through the 8 years.
So I just want to understand the implications of it. Are you saying that by eliminating the 8-year write-off clause, right, that there would be no discretion under any circumstances to reduce fines?
I don't know what you mean by reduce fines. If someone is essentially violating the rules, he's just ignoring, stop work orders. There are people out there who just ignore stop work orders and everything else.
I just want to understand. So in the case of, say, a building that was sold to a not-for-profit that was going to develop that building for affordable housing, and the fines still were on the property, and it was just given to the not-for-profit, there would be no discretion to remove
there should
fines?
Probably be a lien on the sale or the transfer. And the other thing that I recently came to my attention is the fact that this write-off clause, and let's just say the write-off is $50,000, and it's being done over stages, 8 years. Let's say that someone has $50,000 write-off. Does the finance department notify the IRS that essentially they've given this person some untaxable income? I don't know.
Under your proposal,
every
fine, there would be no discretion under any circumstance. I just want to make that clear.
It's got to be studied. And also it depends on what happens with municipal home rule here. Apparently, the state directed the city to put this clause in the city charter. What the clause was before they got this direction in 1984, I don't know. I haven't been able to find out.
Okay, thank you.
This came from the state?
A spokesperson for the the city Department of Finance tells me that the state, and this is her quote, the state gave the city authorization to change the city charter to set a statute of limitations of 8 years to collect ECB debt. The ECB 8-year statute of limitations provision, and she gave me the name, the chapter from the New York Sessions Law of 1984, Chapter 944, directed them to do this. And it's really not a statute of limitations, because from what I gather, statute of limitations, I'm not an attorney, statute of limitations is a concept in a legal concept in prosecutorial cases. This is simply a clerical write-off. This is 8 years, boom, a clerk deletes it.
Ed, I know you've been championing this for years, and you've been pretty aggressive about it, and you have stick-to-itiveness. Do you think part of the problem is that some of these entities are LLCs where, if they owe the fines, it's hard to find out who's accountable, who's responsible?
No, you know who some of these people are. They just ignore it because they know after 8 years it goes away. There are folks that you go into the BISA site, you'll see red banners on the stop work order and the list of tens of thousands of dollars of fines, and they just ignore them and they keep on going about their business.
So in your view, these folks know what the rules are,
right,
and they're just basically evading it and stalling until the 8 years expire.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
One more question.
Commissioner Nuri?
So is your primary concern the revenue, or is it that there are apartments, there are buildings that are in violation?
Both, because the write-off occurs, they don't pay the fine. The question is, do they ever correct the violation? Probably not.
So why don't we go after that aspect of it? I mean,
well, it should be on both ends. The finance department is responsible for collecting the money. The Department of Buildings is responsible for making sure that the problem is corrected. I was at a town hall meeting last October with Mayor de Blasio, and Rick Chandler, what's his last name? Chandler? Or was it Handler?
Chandler.
He
Commissioner
was there.
of Buildings.
He was there, and I mentioned this thing to him, and the mayor says to him, get together with the Commissioner of Finance and get this thing resolved. I don't think they ever met.
Have you heard from the mayor since?
No.
He's busy.
I've invited Commissioner Jihad to our meetings. He didn't come. He did, with great arm twisting, I did get a community liaison who gave me this information.
It's an experience to come to your meetings.
Okay, so. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Mr. Manning and Mr. Jaworski. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you very much.
I have a slip that has two names on it, so I'm going to ask them to both come up, but someone needs to fill out their own slip. Only one person per slip. The name I have is Alyssa Chen and Jennifer Levy, but one of you needs to fill out a slip.
Is it okay if I just accompany her and answer questions?
No, only a person who has been called by us can speak. So if you want to speak, you need to fill out one of these. Okay, Ms. Levy and Ms. Chen?
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name's Alyssa Chan, and I'm here on behalf of the Legal Aid Society with a staff of more than 2,000, and through a network of borough, neighborhood, and courthouse offices throughout the city. The Legal Aid Society provides legal services for clients who cannot afford to...
Could you speak into the microphone?
Is that better? Sorry. So the Legal Aid Society provides legal services for clients who cannot afford to pay for private counsel. So the Society is counsel on hundreds of cases that concern the rights of tenants in rent-regulated and unregulated apartments across the city. And so as a result, we're intimately familiar with the pressure experienced by tenants in the current and developing housing market. So the New York City Charter contains the procedure that community boards, borough presidents, and the city council must employ when considering land use decisions, ULURP. ULURP, however, does not contain substantive requirements, and to the extent that such requirements are imposed by other laws, to the extent that such requirements exist, they're imposed by other laws, most notably the state and city environmental quality review laws. These laws omit critical considerations that should inform our elected representatives' land use decision-making in a democracy. Most notably, the ULURP review process should require an evaluation of primary and secondary displacement from regulated and unregulated units. It should require an analysis of demographic shifts based on income and ethnicity. And finally, the city should track this data from prior rezonings so that our predictions are data-driven as opposed to conclusory as we consider future rezonings. Recent history has established that rezoning results in the accelerated gentrification of communities and the displacement of longtime tenants in both regulated and unregulated apartments. This failure to look at the risk of displacement while considering tenants in rent-regulated apartments requires that the City Council amend the charter. So under SEEKR, a detailed analysis of the environmental effects of indirect displacement is required only if the project has the potential to displace 500 residents. Those residents represent at least 5% of the study area population, and the residents to be displaced have incomes substantially less than the average incomes of the study area population. The objective is to determine whether the proposed project may either introduce or accelerate a trend of changing socioeconomic conditions that may potentially displace a vulnerable population. And yet this analysis is conducted only in cases in which the potential impact may be experienced by renters living in privately held units unprotected by government regulations restricting rents, or whose incomes or poverty status indicate that they may not support substantial rent increases. But we know that the stock of affordable rent-regulated housing is on the decline and homelessness is on the rise in New York City. According to the New York City Rent Guidelines Board, in 2016 alone, 7,524 apartments were deregulated across the city. We know that rent regulation is not enough to prevent a tenant from being displaced, and rising rents are allowed by gaping loopholes in the rent stabilization code. The city charter should be amended to require an assessment that includes displacement of rent-regulated tenants, and this assessment should track income and ethnicity using data from previous rezonings to inform land use decisions.
Thank you. Ms. Levy? Oh, any questions? Ms. Levy?
I was just here to answer questions in case you had.
Okay. Oh, wait, we have a question.
Sorry, I have a
Commissioner
question.
Hirsch?
As part of the tracking, is there any accounting for assumptions around what kind of displacement both on income and ethnicity would happen absent any city rezoning action?
So that is part of the current analysis.
Could you state your name, please?
I'm sorry. That is part of the current analysis. They do look at a no-action scenario and a with-action scenario. What we are saying here is that frequently they say that they can't predict, and each neighborhood is different because they don't track the results of prior rezonings and factor the results of prior rezonings into their analyses. We've seen upzonings across the city that have had gentrifying effects, and we should be tracking that data and incorporating it into our future analyses.
Thank you very much.
No, wait one second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you, Jimmy.
I
I like the idea of doing something whenever we rezone a neighborhood. We've rezoned, the last rezoning in the city was in the early 1960s, and then in the past 10 years, we either upzoned or downzoned a whole bunch of neighborhoods in the city. And we've not had a study as to what the impact has been of either type of zoning. There is no analysis subsequent. And the same could be said of the 1960 zoning original, a zoning resolution. So you're raising a good point. And there should be an analysis of some type. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next two speakers are Ameria Leonard and Anthony Beckford. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Mr. Beckford and Ameria Leonard, or
submitted. Yeah. Who's first? Is it Wong? Is it me?
Ms. Leonard?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. Good evening, commissioners. Can you guys hear me? Am I loud enough? Okay. So what I have for you is very, very short, but I just wanted to start by introducing myself. My name is Ameria Leonard, and I am the new community liaison for Assembly Member Charles Barron, for the 60th Assembly District out in East New York. I want to say that, East New York, for the record. And I am here today representing the Assemblyman. And the Assembly member is in support of the New York City Council member Inez Barron's proposed idea of creating an elected civilian review board with power to have the final decision on all cases before the board, thereby removing the police commissioner from the process. In addition, we are in the process of proposing, 1, the election of the police commissioner, and 2, on the community board level, expanded influence and control of land use in their communities. Further details on these proposals will be forthcoming during the 2019 hearings. But today I just wanted to make sure that I was representing the office, and these things are put on record for everyone to hear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Beckford?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anthony Beckford. I'm a community advocate in the Flatbush area. I'm also the leader of the Brooklyn Sector for Cop Watch Patrol Unit. And I'm also a New York City Assembly candidate. I'm here to basically speak and to testify on behalf in my support for the ECRB, which is Elected Civilians Review Board. Now, with me being the leader of the Cop Watch, I see what most of y'all up here don't see every day, because I'm out there every day. I see and experience it myself as being a black man in a black community. In 2016, out of the 518 incidences that the CCRB itself have found it to be, found the officers to be guilty of, which one of them was me, none of those officers were ever punished, fired, or arrested, and never charged. And that's a problem. When it comes to our community, there seems to be impunity, and that's a big problem. Because if I commit half of the acts that these officers commit, I'll be locked up that day, and more likely be in Rikers that night. And that's a great injustice. So we do need to have an elected process when it comes to the Civilian Review Board. You cannot have the police policing themselves, because we already see how that happens. We have too many hashtags for that. We just recently had a hashtag in Dallas, with the gentleman there who had her door kicked in, and the officer claims that she thought she lived there, which we know that was a lie. We had Saheed Fassel, who was murdered on Utica and Montgomery, by anti-crime officers and SRG officers who have no accountability when it comes to them. in which we call the Bratton Bullies, because that's when they most came into effect. We have Kayam Livingston, Kamani Gray, Chantel Davis, and the list goes on and on. As a cop watcher, every day I record and I see these incidences. Just the other day, when I was helping protesters, which were a bunch of women and children who were basically had the NYPD converge upon them to try to intimidate them from protesting against racial injustice at a nail salon.
Excuse me.
Excuse me,
Only the
people of
person
privilege,
who's up
please do not
here
talk.
Excuse me, sir. Only the person who is seated here gets to speak. Thank you.
So, to address the privileged gentleman there, when you live in my community, they can speak on my matters. Like I said, we need the ECRB to be put into effect. We need to make sure that the mayor and that the police commissioner O'Neill do not have the stronghold that they have had for all these years now, because that is grave injustice to the people. We need to make sure that the people receive their justice, because again, these officers are not being charged. They're not being prosecuted. They're not being fined at all. Then, when it comes to even civil matters, they're not bearing any type of responsibility at all. Even right now, you have the mayor trying to appeal the civil lawsuit from Ms. Ba, who's Muhammad Ba's mother. Now, these are the things that I say again and again is an insult upon injury. And myself, again, being a man in this community who has to raise sons and daughters in this community, have to see the consistent acts of violence against our community. Enough is enough. And if you all feel that you support the people, then you will actually put this into effect in the vote for 2019. If not, then we know which side you stand on.
Thank you, Mr. Bedford. Any questions? Excuse me. Thank you, Commissioner Green.
Are there any specific powers that you want the CCRB to have that it doesn't have already, or is it specific to changing the body of people?
We need that whole body to be changed. We need for the people to be elected, people from our communities to be elected, the people who know what's going on, the people who can actually see what it is and not hold any type of bias or favoritism because of somebody who represents the blue line. There's a gang mentality out there that needs to be cut, and when you're putting these fellow members into the action of CCRB, that's a problem. That's like the mafia trying to basically void out the mafia. It's not going to happen. It's going to continue, and these acts will continue, and lives will continue being lost until there's a change in our city.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bedford and Ms. Leonard.
Why don't you take the position? Somebody.
Paula Siegel. Excuse me. Excuse me.
We want to hear a position on the ECRB.
I'm sorry, but we are here right now to try and gather information. As I said at the beginning of the hearing, that is the process of the hearing. And over the course of the next year, we will be coming back to you after we do research and analysis with proposals and maybe with additional questions. Telling us now that you would like us, excuse me, I am speaking. I'm not interrupting you, so I would appreciate if we have a level of consideration of anybody who's speaking during the entire hearing. The next two speakers are Paula Siegel and Nina. Okay, I'm going to try it. That's it. Can you say that again, please? And Paula Siegel?
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Siegel.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for holding this hearing. My name is Paula Siegel. I am a senior staff attorney in the Equitable Neighborhoods practice of the Community Development Project. As some of you know, CDP is primarily a legal services provider that works with local coalitions to foster responsible, equitable development and make sure that people of color, immigrants, and other low-income residents who've built our city are not pushed out in the name of progress. We work together with our clients to ensure that residents in historically under-resourced areas have stable housing that they can afford, places where they can connect and organize, jobs to make a good living, and other opportunities that allow people to thrive. We're extremely excited to collaborate with this commission on a thorough review of the city charter, which is long overdue in the land use context. I've just handed out a written version of my testimony, which goes into detail on 18 specific recommendations that I'm going to cover more broadly as I speak, and then I'll welcome questions. Attached to my testimony is also the Inclusive City report that Councilmember Reynoso referred to earlier. We worked on that report with the council member, the Manhattan Borough President's Office, and more than 24 of our clients and partners, and you'll see them listed. On the second page, the report contains other specific recommendations, but they're not all specific to the charter. The recommendations I'm highlighting today, the 18 you'll see on the first 2 pages, are specific to the charter, and they echo what we've heard from our clients in recent months, specifically from the Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition, from St. Nick's Alliance in Brooklyn, from good old Lower East Side in Manhattan, from CAV, working in Manhattan and Queens, among others. So the first recommendations address seeking an assurance that more public land is subject to approval through the city's uniform land use review procedures, including land that belongs to the New York City Housing Authority, which can now be disposed of without a city council vote, and all the land that is subject to the irrelevant and outdated Urban Development Action Area program, a program that was designed specifically to facilitate the offloading of public land at a time when the city thought it had too much of it. That is currently written into the charter and must go. We're also recommending ways in which the ULURP process itself should be streamlined and made more transparent. We're asking the Commission to use the charter to leverage the city's oversight and disposition powers to ensure greater and more long-term public benefit, including enforcing existing deed restrictions and encouraging the disposition of public land for public good. There are also recommendations related to the tax lien sale process, which currently endangers community property and lets vacant privately owned property slip to the private market without any kind of public review. Recommendations related to rights and protections for low-income renters and small businesses. And finally, echoing some of the other speakers you heard tonight, recommendations to address the need for data that would allow community planning that is genuinely participatory, equitable, and actually serves our clients. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
I know there's a lot.
There is. I'm sure we'll be seeing you again. Ms.
Rumiantseva.
Say it again.
Okay. Dear members of the Commission, good evening. I'm an immigrant community organizer, as well as a teacher of English as a second language, and a proud New Yorker, originally from Ukraine. I'm here on behalf of a group of interrelated organizations, namely the Ladyshinsky Immigration Archive Center of the Russian and Ukrainian Culture and Russian-Speaking Community Council, which are organizing and advocating for about 200,000 immigrant New Yorkers coming from 15 former Soviet countries, with a special emphasis on refugees, asylum seekers, and political exiles from authoritarian regimes. Our proposal, formulated by the Russian-speaking Community Council President, Dr. Dmitry Daniel Glinsky, concerns one specific article in our city charter, and that is Section 18 of Chapter 1 on the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. We urge you to replace the office with an Immigrant Rights and Policy Commission, whose members should be appointed from among the candidacies of community leaders proportional in number to the size of major immigrant communities in the city. To be effective, these commissioners must be salaried civil servants. Also, they should have local offices in every borough, and these offices should be governed by their own immigrant leadership councils. And here our reasoning. Obviously, our city is nowadays 60% foreign-born. What immigrants of all races, white, black, brown, Asian, Hispanic, need most are, first, representation, and second, real economic opportunities, including bilingual professionals serving for their community and our city. The office, as it is structured under this article, provides none of that. It has some hard-working, dedicated staff with plenty of good intentions, but often with no real experience of being an immigrant and limited connection to immigrant communities themselves. Many immigrants tell us, and I know that from my own experience, the office is not quite responsive and at times not even aware of the challenges and developments between these communities. In constant, governments in San Francisco, Portland, Nashville, Houston, and other major cities, as it is required by their local laws, include community leaders on a more or less representative basis, and they have much broader and bolder mandates than the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. So we are sure New York City should follow these examples of real democracy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Are there questions? Thank you very much, both of you. The next two speakers are Councilmember Brad Lander and Ovia Wally Clay?
That's Oma Wally.
I'm sorry.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Clay.
Okay.
Sorry about the mispronunciation.
No, it's all right. It's Yoruba. It means son who returns home.
Okay.
Good evening, members of the Charter Review Commission and members of the audience. My name is Omawale Clay, and I'm testifying on behalf of Councilmember Inez Barron, who represents the 42nd Council District and is chair of the Committee on Higher Education. I would like to recognize Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, Public Advocate Letitia James, Speaker Corey Johnson, and Council members Ben Callis and Carlina Rivera for introducing Intro 241, the bill that established this Charter Revision Commission. This evening, I would like to request that the members consider making significant changes to the Civilian Complaint Review Board. According to the powers and duties of the board, excerpts from Section 440 of the New York City Charter state, the board shall have the power to receive, investigate, hear, make findings, and recommend actions upon complaints by members of the public against members of the police department that allege misconduct involving excessive use of force, abuse of authority, discourtesy, use of offensive language, including but not limited to slurs relating to race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and disability. I join with advocates who call for establishing a civilian review board that is elected by New York City voters. We have experienced read or witnessed too many accounts of misconduct, abuse, and police killings of New York City residents, particularly of unarmed persons, by officers of the NYPD with little or no punishment meted out to the officers. I point your attention to some of the most egregious. 18-year-old Ramarley Graham from the Bronx, who was killed in his home in front of his grandmother and 6-year-old brother by Officer Richard Hasty. Eric Gardner, who was killed by Officer Daniel Petelio by use of a banned chokehold in Staten Island. And Delroy Small from my district, who was killed by an off-duty officer, Wayne Isaacs. The CCRB was established in 1993. 25 years is sufficient time to give officials and the public the information and data to measure their effectiveness. A report released by the New York Civil Liberties Union in 2007 concluded the city civilian oversight system, which is intended to provide accountability for acts of police misconduct, is not performing the mission it is charged with in the city charter. The examined investigations covering the period 1994 through 2006. Another report released by NYCLU in 2017 found that misconduct by NYPD had increased from 648 substantiated cases to 1,179 cases, an increase of 82%. Of the 518 officers who were disciplined, none were fired, and only 4%, 20 officers, were suspended or lost vacation for more than 10 days. The CCRB continues to close and dismiss most of his cases without completing an investigation. These are recommendations, but not limited to just these. The board must be elected by New York City voters in districts covering the 5 boroughs. The board must have power to investigate police misconduct and make findings. All disciplinary decisions must be binding. The ECRB must be granted with subpoena powers. Far too long, officers who have violated police policy, abused their power, and harmed people they are paid to protect have been able to evade making restitution or receive appropriate reprimand. I think someone asked, how would you measure the effectiveness of the board with these revisions? It would be by the number of police officers who are arrested and incarcerated.
Thank you, Mr. Clay. Are there any questions? Thank you, Mr. Clay.
Thank you.
Mr. Lander?
Thank you, Chair Benjamin and members of the Commission. I really appreciate your service. My name is Brad Lander. I'm a member of the New York City Council. I'm the Council's Deputy Leader for Policy. I'm working with some of my colleagues and with the Speaker on testimony we may bring forward in the future from the Council itself, but for tonight I speak only for me. You have an exciting task ahead of you, obviously looking at the entire charter with the full ability to think about what's working and not working in our city government is a powerful responsibility, and I really appreciate your doing it. It is obviously broad, from strengthening transparency in the budget process to thinking about advice and consent on major appointments like the police commissioner or the chancellor, to, yes, considering a more independent and empowered police review board, which is something that I do support, but I'm not going to testify about tonight. I want to speak to you about 2 things briefly tonight. First, instant runoff voting, and second, some changes to the land use review process to achieve more fair, equitable, and inclusive outcomes and process. So first on instant runoff voting, I know some of you may have seen the 2018 Charter Revision Commission appointed by the mayor received a lot of public testimony from people, including me, but many others, to consider implementing instant runoff or ranked choice voting in our elections to avoid expensive, unnecessary runoff elections in the primary where people wind up with less than a majority. We have to have an expensive runoff. And what we've seen all around the country now is that instant runoff voting is a win-win-win. It increases participation, it saves money, it gives candidates a reason to campaign in every community and not write some communities off, discourages negative campaigning, leads to more diverse representation, and strengthens the majoritarian legitimacy of those elected. I'm not going to go into more details now. There's some details we presented to the prior commission and in their report. But the evidence is from all over, and one of the most interesting things is that in both Maine and Minnesota, candidates who actually lost under instant runoff voting still wound up supporting the system and believing it had been better for their local and state democracies in those places. I urge the Commission to explore the details, review research, and develop a thoughtful proposal to place instant runoff voting on the ballot in 2019. Second, you're going to hear a lot about the land use process. In 1989, the Charter Revision Commission made some significant changes, both to the fair share process and the ULURP process. I respect the work of that commission and people like Chair Benjamin and Chair Weisbrot who helped advance it. But we face some new challenges now. The level of growth and development, the pressure that places on neighborhoods, the affordability crisis, the sustainability and resiliency issues, our aging infrastructure. And I believe that in that context, with those challenges, our highly reactive ULURP process just is not getting the job done. Each application is brought either by a private developer or by the administration, and it's not judged against a broad set of goals we've collectively agreed to for sustainability or affordability or how to share and distribute the challenges and the benefits of growth. We've got to do some things differently. So I do think, and I'm happy to talk more at a later time, about what a comprehensive and proactive planning process would look like that would set shared goals at the beginning of that process in a way that involves some dialogue, data, and cross-acceptance with communities, set a platform so that projects are then judged against that comprehensive plan in a real and thoughtful and fair way that makes sense to communities, that is less reactive. So that's number one. Number two, it's time to revisit and reform the city's fair share process for citing municipal infrastructure and services. They tried some creative things in 1989, but they just are not getting the job done. The council 2 years ago published a really comprehensive report on how we could address the unfairness in the siting of municipal infrastructure, from waste treatment stations to every form of infrastructure. Every community, ought to have access to a good public school and a library, and nobody should be overburdened with those things that we all need, but that folks really would prefer not to have in their backyard. And we have some thoughtful proposals for how to revise our fair share process. And then finally, I joined some earlier colleagues in saying, please look at the disposition process for city-owned land. In this day and age, there is just no reason for us to be disposing city-owned land to for-profit, private developers where they need to make a profit on their development projects. We could put them only to community land trusts or nonprofit developers for permanently and deeply affordable housing or equitable economic development. I apologize for overstaying my time, and I thank you again for your service on this important commission.
Councilmember Lander. Commissioner Vaca had a question for you.
Commissioner Vaca.
Councilman Lander, thank you very much. I'm interested in all of your testimony, of course, but I did want to talk about instant runoff voting, which I am interested in. I know you said you're going back to the council to refine this and to come back with some specifics. Did you submit more specifics to the mayor's panel?
Yes.
Do you include in this proposal instant runoff voting for the 3 citywide offices, or do you include borough president and council people?
So the proposal that I think at a minimum it should be the 3 citywide offices, and I think city council special elections would be a good place to go since there's no general, right? So you've just got one long list of people, and doing a ranking system there would make a lot of sense. In the district, the election that elected Councilmember Donovan Richards, there were 8 candidates. Nobody got over 20% of the vote, and so I'm not close to borough presidents or council members, but if we're trying something new and we got to get New Yorkers aware of it, I think the 3 citywides and council specials would at least be a good place to start, though I wouldn't argue with others.
Do you anticipate an objection from the Board of Elections? Because I'm thinking of the ballot that we receive, and the ballot, how would that go? Technically, how would you do an instant runoff on the current ballot we get from the Board of Elections?
The good news here is that there are a couple of places that use our exact same elections software and machines that have instant runoff voting. So Minneapolis and one other city, and I'm spacing what it is, I apologize, but I can get back to you, use our same scanning system, our same one-face ballots. It's pretty simple to leave the room for people to rank 1, 2, 3. It doesn't take a lot of extra space on the ballot. And people have found it pretty intuitive. I think I was worried when I first learned about it that voters would find it complicated, that the ballot would appear complicated. But in all the places they've done it, and especially in those places that have our same software system, people report they found it easy to use, they found it easy to rank, and it worked pretty well.
And this would be in primary elections?
Yes, primaries, and again, I think those council specials.
Okay, thank you.
Sal?
Council member, the rank the instant runoff is an interesting idea. Why do you think the Mayor's Commission rejected it?
Maybe you can find out more from the mayor's commission than I.
Well, I'm sure you could talk to the mayor.
I did not have a conversation with the mayor about instant runoff voting. I honestly don't know. I think it's a great idea, and I don't know why. The mayor. It's true. I don't think it's a secret that the mayor himself is not an enthusiast. I have a bill. I have a bill in the council to do this. It would have to go to referendum, which is why it's important to come here. We could pass a local law that would have to go to referendum. I sought his support for that bill. I have not yet secured his support for that bill. I think it makes sense from a lot of points of view, so I'm not sure where that opposition lies. And maybe he's not opposed. Maybe we just haven't yet made the case sufficiently
But it seems to me that it's a no-brainer. What's the key objection? It saves money.
I don't know that you can really expect him to speak for the mayor. He's elected in his own district, not the mayor's.
I do know that the Councilmember Lander has the ear of the mayor, so I thought,
there are things that I have been able to persuade the mayor and things I've not been able to persuade the mayor. So, look, I think it's a real question. I will say there are things to pay attention to in the process, and there were thoughtful questions that the commission had about how to make sure that it works in a way that's successful. One of the commissioners on the prior commission said something like, the 1977 Koch-Cuomo runoff was like kind of a visible, important moment in thinking about choices that the city had. I don't think we're spending a lot of money for something that mostly doesn't move the ball down the field. Obviously, you've got some excellent appointees on this commission who are mayoral appointees. I think finding out what the concerns are and let's make sure together we can address them because I think the goal is to make our elections better, and I'm confident we can all get there in a consensus way.
Commissioner Green?
Thank you. I wanted to first thank Mr. Clay for some of the additional specifics that I had alluded to in a prior question beyond just elected CCRB. That's very helpful. Thank you. For Councilmember Lander, a question for you on your reference to more comprehensive planning. I gather there's more forthcoming details, so please defer to that if helpful. But do you have a sense for how often you might like this comprehensive planning to be done, and who's leading it?
Yeah. So, and there's a lot of examples now from around the world of cities. London does it, Seattle and Portland. There's cities that have good processes, and we should learn from what's working and not working because it's not a simple process. I think about every 10 years is probably the right amount of time to come back and update it. You might have a process for making amendments or updates along the way, but you're trying to take a big long-term look. You're starting with some data and saying, what do we think the projections are for the growth in our city? How do we think we are set to handle it and not? What infrastructure investments would we need? What are the core other issues like more resiliency in the face of climate change? So you start there. In terms of who does it, we need a process that involves multiple actors. I think obviously the Department of City Planning would have the responsibility for gathering that initial data, but you're going to have a process, and I use this word in the testimony that some planners use, of cross-acceptance. Nobody is excited about having more growth in their neighborhood, right? So the challenge is people keep coming to New York. We have to think about how to handle that growth thoughtfully in ways that take us forward and don't exacerbate problems. So you got to say to people, look, if we can work together to find a way to plan thoughtfully, you're going to have more ability to say in your neighborhood where it goes and doesn't, what else you need, what kinds of priorities there are. So what exactly does that mean? Yes, we are starting to do some research to try to drill down on what's working and not working in other cities. I don't know. I know that the prior commission picked some issues and really had the opportunity to drill down in more roundtable-like sessions. I don't think it's simple. I want to be naive about it. I make this kind of joke I sometimes make in the testimony that sometimes it just seems like our whole land use process is just REBNY versus NIMBY, like developers that want to see change happen and people in their neighborhoods that feel like that's going to erode or destroy what's the best about their neighborhoods, and we just shout it out. And right now we just aren't starting from a more comprehensive look at what the challenges the city is facing and how we ought to try to work together collectively. I don't want to, again, be Pollyannish or naive, but I think a process like that can help us have the land use conversations in a more productive and thoughtful way.
Paula?
Thank you so much, as always, Councilman. I wanted to just ask if the planning process would include the shared goals. So your vision is that this planning process would come up with those shared goals, which then would be the criteria used going forward.
Yes, absolutely. The idea is you use the process to figure out what are the core challenges that we're facing, what are the goals. You get to some level of specificity, right? You're trying to say, all right, if we think one of the challenges of our city is that it's too segregated, how are we going to think about, in the course of thinking about our transportation and our housing and our schools planning for the future, how do we set benchmarks and goals for what it would look like to improve those things? And when we get a plan that comes forward in the future, we're going to be able to judge it against that benchmark. Does it make the city more integrated rather than more segregated? Does it achieve these resiliency goals we set? You're not going to set all those goals in the charter. Those goals are going to have to be set through the planning process. But I think it would give some ability to evaluate land use actions based on whether they're achieving some of the goals we set collectively rather than only the goals of the individual applicant.
Thank you.
I think Allison was next, then Merrill.
Thank you, Council Member. Just a question on that, because I think I don't want to underestimate the challenges of the current ULURP system. But I guess the question I have is, if you engage in or I guess I have two questions that are sort of compacted, but one assumes that the staff currently at the City Planning Commission have some kind of long-term planning, and so I guess one question is, are you just suggesting that whatever the sort of city planning staff currently engages in becomes sort of a citywide process that others engage in, but it wouldn't supersede the existing ULURP process? I can clarify what I mean.
Yeah, well, I think that's two different questions about how it relates to the ULURP process and how it relates to what planning currently goes on. Of course, the department does some bigger look at things, but there isn't a process that you take that you do every so often. I mean, again, the comprehensive planning thing the city has done at some points in the past, and other cities do. Again, on the kind of about once a decade scale. And yes, you've got a staff. The staff have to do the work, but the setting of the goals involves all these different actors. And just like you've got a commission with multiple appointers, it goes before the planning commission, it comes before the council, it goes before the borough presidents. So the set of goals get negotiated, and by community boards as well. So it's always messy. It always involves negotiation. You come out with a document that, to the best of our ability, represents a shared set of goals. And then I think a really important implicit set in your question, implication in your question is, what does that mean for actions that are brought in those next 10 years?
Right, that is my question.
And yes, what I would say is, I'm not proposing that we undo as of right zoning. The things that are as of right under current zoning today would presumably stay that way. But it seems to me that land use proposals that comport with, that are aligned with that plan, ought to be somewhat easier to move through the process. And land use proposals that don't comply with or align with that plan ought to be harder to move through the land use process. Exactly what that means, how much easier, how much harder. Do you do a comprehensive generic environmental impact statement, and if you fall neatly within it, you don't have to do an additional EIS because it's clear you're within the goals, so you save some time in the process? Or, we have to think, this is sort of the more detailed thinking. I do think plans that comply with the comprehensive plan would need to be easier to move through the process. That would be the whole point of doing this.
Commissioner Tisch?
It's interesting.
You have to speak. You can take it off the thing.
It's interesting that people who've spoken before you spoke about campaign finance reform. And I'm curious, do you draw a dotted line between land use issues and our inability to tackle appropriate campaign financing in the city?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think that's an area where we have made some progress. In the cycle when we changed the law to make contributions from people who do business with the city both much more limited and non-matchable, the percentage of contributions from people in real estate to city council members shrunk dramatically. It was mid-30s, I think 35, 36% before that, and it went down to like 5 or 6% in the cycle after that. There's more to do. I support the campaign finance reform proposal that your predecessor commission has put on the ballot. So, look, it's important to get money out of politics. I think the land use challenges we face are genuinely hard. And I don't think they're only hard. Of course, one reason they're hard is that developers are profit motivated and trying to make money on their development projects, and it's in their interest to do everything they can to get their projects approved. That is absolutely one reason. But there are many others, and it is genuinely difficult. We have a growing city because people are moving here, not because developers are bribing them to move here, because they're moving here. And it's not easy to accommodate that level of growth. Folks in most neighborhoods would just rather keep their neighborhoods the lovely places they are. The infrastructure is old, and so it's not easy to figure out. Boy, today's commute was ridiculous. So I think it's a hard set of problems, and it's not made better by the fact that we finance campaigns on private dollars, but I don't think it's the number one problem in the system.
Carl, and then Sal, and then Jimmy Vaca.
Thank you, Councilmember Lander. I appreciate it. You've given probably as much thought to these issues as anybody, and I really appreciate
that means a lot
it.
coming from you, since you're giving the most thought on them.
As you know, I'm with respect to a comprehensive plan, I just want to get a sense of not so much the process, which is complicated, but the what you see as the sort of magnitude of the plan. As you know, the city did attempt to do this about 50 years ago, a little more than 50 years ago, and invested a huge amount of time and effort. Virtually the entire Department of City Planning was devoted to it, and then by the time it was finished, it was largely not relevant anymore. Time had changed, and it had taken 4 or 5 years to do. So that's one, let's say, extreme. And then what the city has now been doing for the last several years is Plan NYC that has sort of morphed into One NYC. And do you see the latter as a more robust, say, One NYC as sort of the level of planning that you'd like to see, sort of a set of goals? I mean, obviously, One NYC has not addressed all land use issues. Has addressed some city goals, but I'm not so much talking about the substance or the process as much as I am about the level of detail and whether it's closer to a strategy even than a plan.
Yeah.
If you understand my question.
Look, I think it's a good question, and you certainly have a lot more insight, having led that department, into the magnitude of work and how much detail you get. My gut is that it's something that ought to take 1 or 2 years to develop, between kind of the early stage development of the data and then the moving through a process where multiple actors get to give feedback on it. And you ought to hope it's good for about 10 years. So exactly how drilled down can you get? Like, it's sort of guided by the resources you have. I do think that the general scope of the Plan YC and One NYC documents is about the level of detail that I would imagine. I think the question Allison asked about you got to be able to know whether proposals comport with it. So you have to think a little more than those two plans did about, what you're asking of an individual land use action to tell whether it complies with the plan. So I think some thinking would have to go in there. It's a little easier now than it was 50 years ago to be real time, given the data that we have at our fingertips. But I think it's important to do it with the humility that things are constantly changing. You're going to do your best in the amount of time you have. You're going to make some mistakes, and some things a few years later are going to have to be corrected, but we'd still be better off from having given it a shot.
And just one follow-up on that, and I think you answered this, but I just want to be clear. It is a dynamic city, as we know, and it's a complicated city, and it's not the marketplace is not always entirely rational or foreseeable. And so there are times when conceivably something would have to be done that was contrary to a broad plan. If I understood what you were saying, you were suggesting that that should just be harder to accomplish, not impossible to accomplish. Is that
Yes,
fair? Okay.
that's my view.
Council member, on campaign finance, I got the sense that you believe that under our system that we don't have that much influence by lobbyists or developers. Is that accurate?
No. I think the restriction on doing business contributions that reduced them from what was then, $27.50 to council members down to $2.50, and that took away the match, was found by the Campaign Finance Board to have made a significant reduction in the amount of money from folks who were doing business with the city and seeking particular influence, and that it was a very good change. I'd love to see us do more. I support the new proposal, and I'm open to other changes. The influence of money in politics is not good for us at any level. We've got a lot better system than the state does or than the federal government does, but there's more for us to do.
So you would say the pay-to-play is still a problem in New York City?
Less than it was, but still a problem. Sure.
You mentioned, by the way, I'm very skeptical of the New York City Campaign Finance Board statistics about people doing business with the city, the amount being lowered. You do know that lobbyists and developers and people who do business with the city can still bundle money, right?
Well, they're bundled, and again, obviously people can do all kinds of things under the table or cheat, but no, we changed the rule last year or 2 years ago so that now contributions bundled by lobbyists or folks doing business with the city are not matched.
But they're
you could still bundle them, but you've
course.
substantially reduced. And now, if we reduce the contribution limits even further, and you can't get the match. Anyway, these are good changes. I'm all for more changes, but taking the match away from bundled contributions was a very good step.
It's a step forward, but obviously not enough.
Fair enough. Yes.
Councilmember Vaca?
I wanted to get back again to the instant runoff. I would like you to give me information, but if you cannot do it, then I would like the staff at the commission to tell me how much money we spent on runoff elections in the city of New York since the runoff was instituted, which I think was after the 1969 mayoral election. And I would like to know how much money the city has spent in runoffs and what the level of participation in those runoffs were. So that's number one. Number two, this year, if I'm correct, I'm sorry, not this year, 2019, we do not have a major city election, but we will have probably an election for public advocate in March, a primary for public advocate in September, a runoff in October, and an election in November for a job which I must say is advisory and one of advocacy. Let me put it that way. So I'm looking for the taxpayer as well as the reality that this runoff voting is probably more inclusive of people participating in the process, and I would like that information from you, but if not, I would like it from the staff.
Great. We can get the details to you. I know that just for the last public advocate runoff between Letitia James and Daniel Squadron in 2013, I'm pretty sure that the cost was $13 million. Many fewer people came out to vote 2 weeks later than had voted in the primary 2 weeks earlier. So you had a less representative election that we spent an additional $13 million on. We can gather additional data on it as well.
Commissioner Camillo?
Thank you so much, Council Member. It's fun to ask you questions
This
now.
is great. Yes, usually you're not.
I just had two very quick, more I guess, pragmatic questions. Number one, can you talk a little bit more about the cross-acceptance process, what you envision that looking like? Because I imagine every community board will have very many people wanting to weigh in, council member district, how would that be broken down? And similarly, for the comprehensive plan, how granular are we talking about the plan to be? Would it be by a community board or councilmanic districts, or can you just flesh that out a little bit for us?
Yeah, so these are great questions, and I think they really merit some, we have some more homework to do. We'd like to do it in dialogue with others. It seems to me that, it's cross-acceptance is something like if you're in a community board that doesn't have a sanitation garage, and your sanitation garage has been in the next community district over, so they've got all that traffic. And you're willing to say, you know what, we ought to accept that we need to put that sanitation garage in our district. You have more ability to help figure out where it goes than if you say, you know what, we're not accepting that sanitation garage. And so it's things like that. And what that looks like at scale, how a community gets that additional ability if it has leaned into its responsibilities as part of managing the needs the city has, that it has more ability to put forward the things it needs to make those things work. That's the idea here. What does exactly that look like and how would we manage it? I want to spend some more time thinking about it. I welcome other ideas, but that's the idea.
Hi, I'm just going to take a chairman's prerogative here and ask Brad if he could stick around and maybe we could ask him additional questions later so that we can get to some of the other people in the audience.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize to those people who have been waiting, and I will be glad to do that.
Thank you. The next two speakers are Rob Becerra and Anthony Medina. Are they still here? And you are?
Rob Becerra.
Rob Becerra?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Medina?
So, unfortunately, Mr. Medina had to leave because we were given the space of 2 hours, but I'm a community and tenant organizer that had him come here.
Is your name here?
It's not on there. My name is Lucelis Ortiz.
Okay, then would you please fill out a slip? And I will fit you in, I promise. Let me just call, we're trying to take them in order, Maribel Lopez.
That was also a community member that came with me.
Okay. And I said, Magali Pope?
Another community member that came with me.
Okay. So, why don't you speak that?
Ladies first.
Thank you.
And what is your name, please?
My name is Lucelis Ortiz. I'm a community and tenant organizer in Williamsburg.
Okay.
And so we came here for a variety of reasons. That's why there were different people stating, their point. The main point that we came here for was the ULURP process, and we would like to note that the main thing that we was talking about was the community hearings. And so in a community hearing space, we usually have the time for the community, and as you can see for the last 2 hours, where was the community included? However, moving forward, one of the main points is that the ULURP process itself needs to be revised, and so that the developers don't have the monopolization of creating a plan and then just throwing it into the community board. That's not fair to the community themselves. Aside from that point itself, we have an issue with the appointees of the community boards. They have, long tenures as if they were Supreme Court justices, and oftentimes, they stay there and they are very important and influential to the community, but oftentimes their opinions become dated and no longer serves the community. I believe that also needs to be, revised and changed, and so that we appoint these people and that there is a long-term track of having them, actually be benefiting the community that they're serving. And then we had the issue of public land distribution. It seems to us as if the EDC just throws it out there, just throws the plan out, here you go, take the land. And that needs to change as well because, there should be a monitoring if that land is being used for what it was planned for. moving forward, we also had the issue again of the MIH and affordability crisis. The HPD actually creates the formula for, the income. And I may be saying that wrong because I wasn't the one that was supposed to be here, right? The formula itself doesn't serve the community that it's supposed to be serving. It usually serves the incoming community, and it factors in incomes that did not speak to the low-income community that was there. So, oftentimes what's affordable is between $30K and $50K, and we know that people that were making minimum wage that lived there did not make that $50K, and they will not be able to get these apartments with our affordability crisis that everybody claims that they're making efforts to help. And moving forward, with the ULURP process itself, we don't have the displacement analyses that is given to us by a federal constitution being actually implemented. And so our federal constitution under the Civil Rights Act, and I don't know, where the numbers or anything of that sort, I'm sorry, but what I do know is that it gives us the ability of tracing displacement, and we don't have that right now, and we need that. We need to be able to look at our communities and not displace Black and brown people because we don't make enough money, because we don't fit the mold, and because we are not progress according to these new developers. We need to change these things, and that's only what we came here to say. And then, we can talk about the school structures and how it's not fair that we have this influx of charter schools coming in, giving a disparity to the older schools that were there and not allocating resources. So, just figuring that out, because we're doing a disservice to the low-income populations that were here and that created the communities that are now so lucrative for everyone to develop. And I thank you for your time, truthfully.
Thank you. I'm glad that you were able to stay.
Thank you.
Are there questions?
I can't really answer them,
That's okay. You did good. You did good, and what you said was both things that have been themes from a number of people, both about how ULURP works and about the disparity of resources throughout our city in different communities. And I think that's an important message, so I'm glad you were able to stay and to give those messages and reinforce how important that is.
Thank you.
But if you could get that slip for me, and so
I'll
I
write it out
have
for
your
you.
name.
It looked better on paper.
Okay. And now, Mr. Becerra?
Yes. Good evening.
It's all yours.
Appreciate it. My name is Rob Becerra. I'm a national animal rights activist and WP18 media affiliate in New York City. I appreciate your time. I came here to speak to you today about animal welfare in New York City. The Department of Health and Mental Hygiene oversees the animal care and control in New York City. In my opinion, and in a lot of other people's opinion, they should not be able to do so, as animals are not a primary concern for the DOH-MH. And a lot of the public, a lot of the people want to have a Department of Animal Welfare to oversee, an independent agency to oversee all animal-related issues in New York City. So we can fix that issue by creating an agency that will also develop jobs, that would also be beneficial because the agency that we create will oversee the animal care and control. Right now it's the Department of Health. It will have a ripple effect across the country by having an independent agency that will put animals as a primary concern. And being part of the media, you noticed a lot of times the media covers animal stories. It's a hot topic. It's very important to a lot of people. And I'm one of those people. The New York Post earlier this year, one of my affiliates, they actually did a story about the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene proposing a $1.4 billion proposal to the ACC that would extend a 34-year contract to 2052. This will basically halt any reform that is needed in the ACC. And that is why we need the Department of Animal Welfare to be created. There's a lot of atrocities that go on at the Animal Care and Control. The Department of Health and Mental Hygiene could honestly care less because they have to deal with the mental health of New York City. It's not primary to them. So that's a big issue that we have to handle and we have to address, especially taxpayers' money, over $1.4 billion. I'm pretty sure most people would like to know where the money's going to. And that's another issue. The Department of Animal Welfare, besides creating jobs, would fit within a New York City budget of what would be planned by, obviously, the people who initiate and who go through with the process. It would also give adoptable animals who are being killed on a daily basis an opportunity to be adopted, which is very important. Some of you guys might have animals, some of you might not, but just know that adoptable animals daily are being killed, and they have potential in the right facilities, overseen by the right agency, to become adopted, to have a fighting chance. Because right now they don't. And now they want to extend a 34-year contract with an ACC that needs a complete reform. And I came to you guys today because I have experience working many advocacy projects. I've been a part of the New York City's mayor campaign, the Los Angeles mayor's campaign. It's very important to get this done, and it will be a ripple effect across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra. Sal?
Well, thank you for your testimony, Mr. Becerra. Are you aware of any cities that do this better than New York City?
Austin, Texas has an animal shelter that's a state-of-the-art facility. But as far as having a Department of Animal Welfare, we would actually be making history, and we would be breaking ground. And I believe that will have a ripple effect across the country.
Does Austin have a no-kill policy?
Yes, they do. We do not.
Can you define what that means?
They're not going to kill. Austin, Texas has an animal shelter where they take in 20,000 animals a year. And when I spoke to the executive director for the ACC, they mentioned they've taken 30,000 animals a year. We have over 8 million people in New York City. We have vast more resources than Austin, Texas. But they still manage to be a no-kill shelter. No animal will be euthanized unless if it has cancer, unless if it's very ill. Here, they euthanize because a lack of resources, as they say, and a lack of space. So by spinning out the Department of Health to the Department of Animal Welfare, we will be able to restructure and re-strategize, and we will be able to come up with ideas to basically become no-kill.
Yeah. Your idea sounds like something that we should talk about, but I would like a proposal from you. I'm not aware how many people in the Department of Health deal with animal issues. What would it mean to create a new department? What would be the cost? How would it be better than what we have now? So if you have an opportunity to get us something a little more specific than just propose, although I appreciate what you're saying. You're proposing a separate department to highlight the needs of animals, but I think administratively I'd like to see a little more if you could get us something.
Yes, that would be possible if I can receive some information to email or come up with the proposals. I'd like to send it in.
Certainly the staff will
Yes,
see
and
you.
if you look at the pamphlets down there, it has our email address and our website and a number of different ways you can get in touch with us with that information.
Absolutely.
Mr. Karras and then Commissioner Green.
I just wanted to take a step back and thank Ms. Ortiz and the people from Los Sures, and also if your organization would think about, we've at the Manhattan Borough President's Office, we've been working on trying to open up the ULURP process and inviting stakeholders and community groups in before something is certified. And we'd like to hear your organization's thoughts on perhaps how that can be done, for should it be just for projects of a certain size? Should there be a mechanism but not a requirement that be done? So we are interested in looking at that aspect as well. Or I am interested, I should say.
Well, I'll stay and then take your information.
You gotta speak into the mic.
Sorry. So I'll stay and I'll exchange information with you because we are very interested in engaging in that conversation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Green?
I was just going to offer a question to Mr. Becerra about if you do put forward a more detailed proposal, I would love to hear maybe some specifics. It sounds like your biggest issue is the no-kill policy, about ways to institutionalize that, or if there's an underlying policy framework, like is it just a resource issue, or are there other reasons that you have heard that the city is doing it now? I'm just to suggest that maybe independent agency doesn't necessarily mean a change in policy in that regard.
Right, absolutely. Well, you know what it is? We have a moral obligation to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Children and animals are also included. When you have volunteers from the shelter that reach out to me because I do animal rights, it's very disturbing when you hear some of the stories. If you even Google it, Scott Stringer did an audit on the ACC, and he was completely astonished at what he found. So I think, what the people, because a lot of people couldn't make it tonight, I'm speaking for, are asking for is within reason. Like Mr. Vaca was saying, maybe some more details would be helpful to kind of go over. And I will talk with a few other people who are also involved with me to get you those details. But me, morally, I can't just sit there and let people who are telling me, oh, well, they just put down an adoptable animal. And they had an adopter coming all the way from Jersey, and the person found out, oh, I'm sorry, we euthanized the dog. And they show up 100-mile drive, and they found out the dog is dead. And the dog was taken from a battered home. And, it's just sad. It really is. So I'll do what I can to get that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you both very much for staying.
I'm going to go right just live now.
Okay, thank you. I now have David Cohn and David Greenfield. Two Davids, one desk. Or do we have two Davids? Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Cohn, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Benjamin and Commission members. I'm going to speak fast with the time limit. My name is David Cohen of SEIU 32BJ, and on behalf of our 85,000 members in the city, thank you for holding these hearings. Tonight I'll talk about revising the charter to create more transparency and accountability with the city's procurement of subcontracted building services. Given the city's interest in ensuring that taxpayer dollars are used to support family-sustaining jobs, it is critical that the city follow best procurement practices when it comes to subcontracting for security and janitorial services. Subcontracting building service work creates thousands of middle-class jobs for working-class people, particularly immigrants and people of color. Higher standards in building service subcontracting that take into account the importance of contractor experience and capacity creates good jobs for our communities. Without these standards, low-bid contracting creates a race to the bottom amongst bidders. When bid prices are driven down, contractors may cut corners. Contractors may even lack the capacity to meet payroll, and they may use lower quality health care, retirement plans, leaving workers and their families vulnerable. The following proposals are critical to ensure our dollars are used wisely and to ensure that our city's subcontract building service jobs are good, family-sustaining jobs. Currently, not all government spending on the city's subcontracted security work is held to the same uniform high standards. We believe that it should be in order to ensure quality security services. The charter should be amended to require that DCAS is the lead agency to procure all security services required by agencies. Additionally, the charter should require that all security procurements are issued through RFPs with good job standards. All security contracts should include minimum training requirements of 40-hour enhanced security training with an annual refresher. All security solicitations should include meaningful capacity and experience requirements, as well as clear indication of intent and ability to comply with prevailing wage requirements and other job standards. This should be the policy and not low-bid contracting. The other David's going to be fun here, I promise. Additionally, when purchasing out the DCAS master contract, agencies should be subject to transparency and accountability requirements. When flipping to city reimbursements, when non-government entities such as non-public schools, city-funded private homeless shelters, and others receive reimbursements for security service contracts, interesting, these contracts should be held to the same standards of accountability with respect to capacity, qualifications, responsibility, and compliance with job standards and city contracts. Ideally, the non-government entities should be required to purchase of the DCAS master contract. Alternatively, 22 seconds, I'm going to skip ahead. Alternatively, they should require similarly vigorous vetting standards. Some jurisdictions, and I'm moving now to council review of contracts, require city council approval of certain subcontract services. For example, in Washington, D.C., the council review is required before the award of a multi-year contract or contract in excess of $1 million during a 12-month period. In order to ensure adequate oversight of subcontracted security services, the charter should be amended to require council approval of security contracts at an appropriately designated threshold. So it's pretty technical. Do I have 30 seconds?
30 seconds.
Okay. Additional seats on the PPB. So currently there are 5 members on the Procurement Policy Board. These seats are appointed by the mayor and 2 seats appointed by the comptroller. We recommend the commission explore adding seats to the PPB in order to give the council a voice on the board. This will ensure a broader range of stakeholders have deeper engagement in the full life cycle of our city's procurement process. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
a lot.
More.
It's
Lindsay?
really very fun.
And then Sal.
Thank you. Clarifying question.
Sure.
I know procurement is a confusing set of laws. Changing from low bid to other types of preferences, do we have the, I guess, legal authority, to your knowledge, to do that in the charter versus local ledger? It doesn't require state ledge, as I've heard other things do?
I don't believe it requires state ledge. I think it can be done through charter amendments.
Thank you.
Sal?
Mr. Cohen, you probably don't remember this, but I passed the city's living wage law in 1996 that mandated that all of security services and food service workers that were outsourced had to be paid the prevailing wage. So how does this square with your proposal?
That would reflect that. I mean, living wage is slightly different than prevailing wage, but again, contracted security services purchased through the City of New York or subcontracted, those workers should be paid the prevailing wage.
But aren't they should be paid under the law that we passed in 1996, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and generally they are. We want this to be the absolute standard. And really through the procurement process that the city has established through the DCAS master backdrop contract.
So you just want to strengthen? Okay.
Thank you very much. Mr. Greenfield.
So a rabbi, a priest, and an imam walk into a bar. I'm sorry, wrong speech. I apologize.
Well, we'd like to hear the rest of the joke.
We're live streaming. I can't really say it. Good evening, Chair Benjamin and Commissioners. Chair Benjamin has a nice ring to it, I might add.
Thank you so much.
I'm David Greenfield, former council member, current CEO of Met Council on Jewish Poverty. I'm actually here today in my capacity as a nonprofit CEO, and I hope, if you'll allow me, to return in the future to share some observations as the former chair of the Land Use Committee. First, I want to thank you all for volunteering to be members of the Charter Revision Commission. I appreciate your service. It's important work that you're doing. Quick background about our work. The Met Council on Jewish Poverty is the largest Jewish communal social service agency in America. We serve 225,000 people each year right here in New York City. We have 16 affiliated Jewish community councils, 21 affordable housing buildings, the largest free kosher food program in America, through 35 affiliated food pantries, and a myriad of other programs for seniors, people in crisis, and victims of domestic violence. I'm here in my capacity as CEO of Met Council representing a committee of nonprofit CEOs that I'm co-chairing with Beth Goldman of NILAG, who are concerned about a specific procurement issue, which is perhaps why we're on the same panel. In FY17, 81% of all new and renewed contracts arrived at the Comptroller's Office for registration after their start date had already passed. That is per the Comptroller's report in May 2018. As a real-world example, I have 16 affiliated JCCs that provide services to tens of thousands of people every day. They, just like all of us, have contracts with the city for a variety of social services. In some cases, it can take over a year to get a contract registered to provide vital services. This has a myriad of different effects, including challenges on budgeting, staffing, services. When you finally get the contract approved, you're then scrambling to do the services, and quite frankly, they're not quite as good as if you were able to plan it out to begin with. Now, we're fortunate. We actually have the resources. We actually loan our JCCs money at no charge, but most organizations have to actually borrow money, and occasionally, quite frankly, if we're really not getting paid for a while, we have to borrow money to cover for the money that we loaned to the JCCs, and we pay interest for that. At any given time, we have around $1 million that we're loaning to our member agencies to help them pay their bills. It costs us time, money, and effort, and that's us who has the resources, but quite frankly, thousands of nonprofits actually do not. I just want to point out an important point. A lot of people ask, well, why should it matter to me, especially the hundreds of thousands of people who are streaming this now online? And the reason, there are hundreds of thousands of people. I don't know why people laugh at that. The reason is that, quite frankly, in many cases, we can do the same work that's being done for cheaper and better. We at Met Council are currently housing formerly homeless for $25 a night at 2 of our facilities in Brooklyn. I want to repeat that. For $25 a night, we're housing formerly homeless New Yorkers. Now, 30 more seconds, Chair, may I? Thank you very much. There's been a lot of hearings on this. The Comptroller put out a great report. The administration has promised to make changes. Many council members have been great advocates, Councilmember Helen Rosenthal and Stephen Levin and Justin Brannan. Unfortunately, we haven't seen a lot of change, and that's why we're here today. I want to be clear. This is not the fault of any single administration. This has been going on forever, and this is why it should be revised in the Charter. Part of the challenge is that there are too many agencies with differing standards. So in one agency, you may get your money after 180 days. In another, it might take you a year and a half. What we're requesting is that you consider amending the Charter to include a provision that would require the city to register all contracts within 60 days of their start date. Then there's an additional 30 days for the Comptroller's Office, which means that after 90 days, you actually have access to those resources. After 60 days, this is a critical part, after 60 days, the city would then have to tack on a payment of twice the prime interest rate to A, give the city an incentive to actually get it done, and to B, reimburse those nonprofits who actually have to go and borrow the money at that cost. And I would finally add that there should be a provision for transparency so that these contracts can be tracked along the way. I want to thank you all for your service. I look forward to hopefully returning to share some observations on the land use side, and I'd be very happy to take any questions or comments, especially from Jimmy Baca.
Well, no, I know you're accustomed to choosing who's going to speak. Today I get to choose.
He was just so enthusiastic. Listen, Chair, be nice to me. This is my first hearing on the other side, outside of the council. So
this is your maiden voyage?
Please, yes, please be kind. Please be kind.
I will, but I have a question for you.
Yes, Chair.
Actually, 2 questions. Are you suggesting that the procurement problems limit the selection of vendors the city has and the price that we pay? Do we pay more because of this registration problem and the length of time it takes? Question number 1. Question number 2, since we only pay on reimbursement, are you suggesting that there be a payment up front before service is actually delivered on service contracts in order to get money to the agencies?
So when I'm, just to clarify, thank you for those questions. That is not my music, by the way. I do not walk around with ghost music wherever I go, just for the record. It's usually more upbeat, quite frankly. So,
is that a terracin? What?
We're speaking about procurement. It's a very spooky issue. So, to your questions, what I'm actually suggesting is that the standard be registration of contracts, right? So not reimbursement. The challenge really is that these contracts aren't even getting registered,
after the official start date of the contracts. And by the way, just a shout out to those former council members. Would you like to know the worst offenders are actually discretionary funding? And the irony is that 98% of these contracts are actually renewals, right? And so these are organizations that have already been vetted, and they already have Vendex, and they've already been rated. And so the obvious question is, why does it take so long to actually get them renewed? And the answer is there are different standards across the board. And I want to repeat this because it's an important point. This has been going on since the great tragedy in the 1800s when Brooklyn decided to merge with the rest of the boroughs, creating New York City. I have to say that because I'm in Brooklyn, of course.
We didn't merge with Staten Island, so former council member Fiala is innocent of...
Yes, that's true, and they're still working on succession. We're actually pretty happy now the way things have worked out. But the point that I'm making is that the key part for us is the time for registration. And then I think that there certainly are some opportunities, and we're chatting about it internally, and we will get you a more formal document at a further date about specific suggestions, such as perhaps funding some of those funds for some trusted partners as well. But the main recommendation really is actually requiring the city to register the contract within 60 days, and more importantly, if you do not have a hook, if the city doesn't actually have to pay for it, we need the city to cover the costs. And to your last point, it actually does end up costing us a lot more money. So what happens is that when you finally get a contract registered, you have to scramble to find the services and the vendors. And so what ends up happening is that realistically, you're paying more money for services and you're not getting the same quality services, right? Because you can't plan, you can't budget, you can't hire the staff. And so it limits the ability of nonprofits to provide those services in an efficient way to New York City residents, which I think it's a very important charter issue.
Does it limit the number of not-for-profits who can respond, who don't have the ability, that smaller CBOs that don't have the ability to carry themselves for 3 months or 6 months or 9 months without payment, fall out of the procurement system?
Oh, absolutely. There's really no question. In fact, our JCCs, for example, which vary in size between $500,000 and $10 million, tell us that but for the fact that we float them the cash, there's no way they were able to do it. And so we hear this all the time from smaller nonprofits who will just say, I can't go after that contract because I can't just randomly hire someone when the city decides to pay me. Once again, I'm pointing out again, because of the context of how things get misinterpreted these days, every administration has had this problem. Future administrations will have this problem as well, which is why I think it is best tackled by a Charter Revision Commission.
Councilmember Vaca, do you still have a...
Be kind, Jimmy.
No, I obviously agree with Councilman Greenfield, and I think that also we have to understand that the nonprofits cannot keep and retain staff. They cannot hire, they cannot retain. People don't know from week to week whether they're going to be on the staff of the nonprofit. The smaller nonprofits cannot exist this way. The larger ones are keeping the smaller ones afloat. I don't understand, and I ask you, David, you keep saying that this has been going on for years through different administrations. My question is, why has this escaped solution? Do you think that a revision in the city charter is the solution, or are we talking about administrative problems that really can be solved but have not been solved? I want to make sure that if we do something here, that this is going to be the answer.
First of all, thank you, Commissioner. I want to actually stress your point, which is something that a lot of people don't realize, which is it's very difficult to attract talent to critical roles when they don't know that they're going to get paid, right? So if you're talented and you could be doing one of a variety of things, you would much rather go work for a for-profit nursing service, right, than work for a not-for-profit because you know that they're getting their reimbursements, for example, from insurance companies as opposed to us. And so therefore, to your point, we struggle actually to get talented folks, and then we scramble at the last minute, and it certainly hurts the quality of these programs and projects. So thank you for pointing that out, Commissioner. I think the main problem, honestly, to be blunt, is incentive, right? Which is that what's the incentive? In the end of the day, and this is why I think it's so important that that hook of the city reimbursing the prime rate, twice the prime rate, which is really the cost of what it costs us to borrow money, because if there's no incentive for the city to make this change in the city charter, then the answer is what, in fact, how is it enforceable? If there was an incentive, you certainly could be sure that many people will start pointing out, hey, it's beginning to cost the city millions of dollars a year because we're not paying for it. Now, just to be clear, I want to be clear about this. It's costing the nonprofits millions of dollars a year. We're paying for it right now.
We can't afford to pay for it. And if we're paying for it, what it means is that millions of New Yorkers are getting inferior services, right? We don't have magical money that falls from the air. So when I look and I budget in my organization, I know I'm paying X% interest this year for money that I'm borrowing, which means that I'm providing less services in a food pantry, less services to a victim of domestic violence, less services to a senior who needs a place to live, all services that we currently provide. So someone has to pay for it. What I'm suggesting is the city is asking us to contract these services. We're doing it, and I would point out again, at an exceptional value, $25 per person per night for formerly homeless. I think we can all agree that's a fairly good deal for the city of New York. And then I have to float the cash. I don't think that's fair, and I think it's really harming New York City residents, and I think that the only way to get this done is through a charter commission.
But I understand, but I think it is sad that we are contemplating penalizing the city because they cannot administer taxpayer funds. So we penalize the city, i.e. the taxpayer, because the administrative structure of the city cannot, in a timely way, finance social service and related programs.
So,
I think
Commissioner,
that's sad.
I would just say I'd be optimistic that if that would happen, the city would then realize that it's, the chair has cut me off, I'm done. See, I'm learning.
Carl, you had a question? Sorry,
Yes.
Jimmy.
First of all, Mr. Greenfield, I just want to thank you for your years of service on the council and your role as chair of the Land Use Committee, and I can't resist the opportunity to ask you questions. Finally. And as you,
Is Brad still here? Because we might be here for a while. Okay, yes. Yes.
But, as you said, this is a problem that's existed forever.
I want to refresh your memory, Commissioner. I was fairly kind and generous when you were sitting on the other side of the table. So please return the favor. I'm just pointing it out. Yes.
I'm going to be equally kind and generous.
Fair enough.
And you were kind and generous, so I appreciate it. This has been a problem that's existed forever, and as a former head of many not-for-profit organizations, believe me, I share your pain. I know exactly what you're saying. My question to you is about the. First of all, there is a history, and I know the city does monitor which agencies are processing their contracts to the controller on time. And by on time, it's within, 30 days or 60 days. And there are agencies that are continually violators, and there are agencies that process them very quickly. And that has always been true, and I assume it has stayed true. And I guess one question I have for you is there a difference among different kinds of agencies in terms of what kind of agencies do these in a reasonably efficient way, what kind of agencies don't? That's one question. And then my second question is related to what Jimmy Vacca said, which is taking the quite dramatic step of, in a sense, penalizing the taxpayer for the city's own negligence. Is there any other example of the city actually paying interest for untimely payments?
Can I just say something? I am the past chairman of Met Council, so I am not a lawyer, but I would urge David, in his new capacity, not to answer your question about which agency does it better than others.
I'm not asking. I'm just
just because those funds are really important to Met Council.
No, I appreciate
Carl,
what you're saying,
I would just say that
Thanks
there
for
are
looking
some.
out,
I
Chair.
guess my question is just generally,
so-
is there a pattern of certain agencies?
Yes. So I actually.
And I appreciate Meryl's concern.
Thank you, Commissioner Tisch, for looking out for me. I appreciate that. And thank you, Commissioner Weisbrod. So I will actually refer you to the excellent study that was done by the Controller's Office in May of 2018. And the Controller details exactly every single city agency and what their timeline is. And so I will refer you to that document without opining it on it myself. So he did a very good job on that, and we thank him for that, and he's been an advocate, obviously, for this as well. On the second issue that you referenced, actually, so this is in fact, and I expect you'll hear from Beth at a later date. But this is, in fact, that issue is, in fact, one that Beth Goldman at NILAG, who's co-chairing this effort with me, is currently exploring, which is the other legal mechanisms and the enforcement opportunities as well. And I would just point out, which I think is very important, is that I don't view this as a penalty on the taxpayers. I view this as a reimbursement to the nonprofits, right? So it sort of really depends on your perspective, right? In the end of the day, the city has an interest in ensuring that we can provide all the services that you want us to provide, right? And so essentially what's happening is you're effectively, I don't mean you specifically, but I mean you as representatives of the city, you end up underfunding the government contracts because we now have to pay out of pocket, not just the cost of interest, but also scrambling and trying to put things together. And so the way I would view it as is that the city is simply fully funding that particular contract. And I think if you look at it from that perspective, it seems a lot more reasonable than fining the taxpayers. I'm certainly not in favor of fining the taxpayers, but I will say that I do think that that hook will finally give the city an incentive to actually make the change. And I expect, Commissioner Vaca, that's what you'll see, which is that when there's an actual cost attached to it, and when in fact the city now has to do their budgeting and say, hold on a second, maybe we don't want to pay $100 million in interest payments every year to nonprofits because that's money they need, I suspect that magically it will become a priority for future administrations, because like I've said on multiple occasions, this is a challenge that has plagued other administrations, and that's the final point I want to make, which is I don't think we should be subject to the whim of any one administration. The reality is, and this is a vital point, the city cannot do the services that we in the nonprofit community do. We have hundreds of thousands of dedicated nonprofit employees who provide services to millions of New Yorkers, and as I pointed out time and time again, we do it for a fraction of the cost, and in many cases, quite frankly, it's better. So it's not that we're doing something that is above and beyond. These are services that the city has asked us to do, that essentially you're farming out to us at a discount, and now we have to pay additional fees for the cost of doing that. I'm simply asking that the city reimburse us for that, and hopefully it won't come to that, Commissioner Vaca and Commissioner Weisbrod, and the city will simply say, well, probably not worth making the payment, so let's get on this and let's make it uniform. And that's the final point that I want to make, which is, to your point, you're right.
The last one was your final point. You said the last one was your final point.
That was my last final point. Okay.
Final points.
Okay.
Yes, Chair. Thank you.
Paula?
One simple thing. I thought the city had changed the payment, and what you're referring to is a registration problem, because now nonprofits can get the first 3 months
Correct.
once registered.
Correct. The time, exactly. What I'm referring to is the time that it takes to get registered, and in many cases it can take over a year for the contract to get
But
registered.
once, if that could be fixed,
Yes.
we do have a way that you can get the first 3 months paid.
That's right, post-registration. The problem is that, according to the Comptroller's report, 10% of all contracts actually are not registered until a year after their start date.
Understand.
And it is very varied, and that's another reason why the Charter Commission should do it, because different agencies do things differently, and you folks have the ability to regulate it across the board.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, David.
Excellent.
I would just like to recognize Alex Camarda, who spoke at our Bronx hearing and who is here today, but will not be speaking. Next, I have Lucy Catine, or Coton, and Ms. Hagan. Is that Ms. Coton or Ms.
Hi.
Coteen?
I'm Lucy Coteen. Good evening. Thank you for your patience for this long evening. I actually was going to talk a little bit about ULIP, so I wrote a few things. As we know, the city is controlled by the real estate industry. Communities are protesting from Chinatown to Inwood, from Brooklyn to Queens, on out-of-scale developments and upzonings that even the community boards have said no to. But it doesn't matter, because then the hearings go to the Department of City Planning, and the commissioners have never met a development that they did not like. No concern for infrastructure, neighborhood character, or livability are ever mentioned by the city planning commissions. ULURP is a sham, a bone thrown to the people so that it looks like they actually have some say in how their communities develop. Zoning limits that were hard fought for are overthrown in an instant, which leads to ever-increasing cynicism from the public. Why should they get involved in zoning and planning when a few years later their work is undone and disrespected? ULURP does not work because the developers in most cases have been in conversation with city planning and elected officials for at least 2 years and are often guided by city planning. The developers pay powerful lobbyists hundreds of thousands of dollars before the public process of ULURP begins to meet with elected officials and city planning commissioners. An example would be Alloy, who spent over $500,000 on 4 different powerful lobbying companies to promote 80 Flatbush Avenue. The developers and lobbyists spend many thousands of dollars contributing to candidates and attend all their high-end functions. It took a court order to get the de Blasio administration to release over 4,000 emails between them and consultants to verify what we all know. The developers have the mayor's ear, and they work in conjunction with each other and not with the communities. There must be full transparency presented to the public, dates of communications and content of discussions between developers, their highly paid consultants, and officials must be made available to the public. Developers are forbidden to give contributions to candidates and electeds when doing business with the city, but they find plenty of ways to get around that. We need a better process. And just something I was thinking about is another problem is when we do have hearings before the zoning committee or the subcommittees, the city council members who are on those committees are rarely there in attendance. They may be there for a little while, but then most of them leave. I've been at a couple of subcommittee hearings on zoning where I believe it's Rafael Salamanca is all by himself holding down the fort, and then those same city council members vote on these upzonings or rezonings and developments, but they weren't present to hear the community speak out. And I know community members feel very offended by that because they may stay around while the developer speaks and talks about their project, and then they all have to run off to their other committee hearings or meetings. And so, but then they go and they have to vote. And what are they voting on? Because they don't listen to the community. So that was most of what I wanted to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for staying and presenting your testimony.
Question.
There's a question.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Good to see you. One of the prior witnesses mentioned that our campaign finance laws have significantly improved, and there isn't that much involvement from lobbyists or developers. Do you agree with that assessment?
I believe I guess it was Brad was talking, or somebody talking
one of the
about
prior
how
witnesses.
they can't have their matches, their funding matched, but they can still give lots of money. They can also contribute in other ways. They contribute to the charitable organizations that electeds or the mayor has set up, to gain favor, presumably, with the mayor or whoever. So there's other ways to contribute money. They hold fundraisers. We see the massive developers, the big developers holding fundraising events for the mayor. Toll Brothers, Forest City Ratner, for a couple examples. So there's many ways to curry favor. The lobbyists, when those emails were released from the mayor, we found that they had, and I forget the number, something like 54 lobby meetings with lobbyists in a month among high officials in the mayor's office. So it's not just about exact dollars or those dollars being matched. Sometimes people in their offices contribute money, under their own private names, but we know those who get the money know where that money is coming from.
So I think we're in agreement that the present system isn't working.
Yeah, it doesn't work, and the people are really not given a proper hearing on issues from their communities. Like I said, they fight for zoning, and then a few years later, a developer comes along and says, I've got this great project. Look at all the things I'm giving to the community. Let's upzone in by three times the current zoning or whatever it is. We need to look at the developers' benefits, not what they claim the benefits they're giving to the community. That they then go and say, well, look at I'm giving, 80 Flatbush Avenue, for those of you familiar with that, is a perfect example. where the developer says, at no capital cost to the city, I'm giving you all these great benefits, schools, cultural center. Let's look at the developer benefits. What taxes are they not paying? What profits do they expect to gain? Let's look at how much they gave to the lobbyists to curry favor. As I said, now, for instance, one of the vice presidents from Kaiser, I'm not sure how to say, Kasera, who was called by City and State the #1 lobbyist in the city. The vice president is now the chief of staff for the Speaker of the City Council. That's a little concerning to me. Someone said to me, yeah, but people change. But come on, he was the vice president of the #1 lobbyist, now the chief of staff for the Speaker of the City Council. They have so much influence, as I said initially. Everyone I know, people who are fighting, the activists who are fighting to preserve their neighborhoods, feel that the city is owned by REBNY and the real estate interests.
Thank you, Ms. Coteen. Any other? Jim?
Other than full disclosure of contacts between developers and city planning in the pre-certification phase, do you have any other suggestions for that period between, when an application is first presented and when it's certified by the city planning?
Well, I think there were some suggestions today. Brad was talking about coming up with some goals that are shared by the community and perhaps by the developer. Another suggestion is that the developer comes early to the community and talks about what his plans are and how to improve them and what people like or what they don't like or what they'd like to see. I'm not smart enough to know what would work. I think a lot of people have brought up the issue of ULURP tonight, and I'm sure as you've gone around the city, that's a very big issue. And I'm hoping that you all can come up and put it together and come up with some recommendations that would work for everybody. But, we're so tired of seeing our city for sale, For those of you who have seen Tom and Gotti's book, City for Sale, what was it? Brad said something about REBNY versus NIMBY being, and that's what it looks like, but we don't want to have that contentious arrangement. It should not be that. We should be working together to make the city better. The environmental impact statement should be much more inclusive. The issue of infrastructure planning needs to start early. We don't have the infrastructure. We just don't. All these developments where they say, well, this is a transit-rich location. For instance, again, 80 Flatbush Avenue. Transit-rich, it's so rich you can't get on the train. That's how rich it is. And then they want to bring in another 3,000 people there and surround, and it's never a comprehensive look at the community. We see over and over again, it's not an integrated look at what's going on. We see over and over again, there may be in a few blocks, 5 to 10 projects going on at the same time, and they only look at the one project. And this is so unfair to the community that bears the brunt of the impact. Pass it on.
Thank you.
Ms. Haig?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Shelley Hagan. I know what Lucy is talking about. We're trying to fight for some sort of inclusion in this 80 Flatbush ULURP. But we're now being bombarded with more ULURP projects. There's one at 570 Fulton. There's one coming up that I'm aware of on Clinton and Atlantic Avenue. And ULURP seems to be a sham. I know I'm about the 5th or 6th person to bring up problems with ULURP. I think the law is well intended, but I think it's obsolete, and when there's obsolescence, there develop problems. So that's my wish, that this commission could take a good hard look at ULURP. I think Councilmember Lander talked about a 10-year period to take another review, and that seems reasonable to me. I also would like the commission to take a look at the Business Improvement District law. It also, I think, was well intended, but it's about 40 years old now. And the way it was written, if a bid goes in, commercial tenants are trapped in it, whether they want it or not. They don't have a vote. It's highly undemocratic. And I'm sure there were good reasons for that, because I think that the city was recovering from near recession when this idea was adapted. And in the beginning, it was big corporations in Midtown who were filling in for services that the city wasn't providing. Those of us who are old enough to remember, there was garbage piling up on the streets and no security. But it's slided around, and now the bid that I'm familiar with is the one on Fulton Street, and it's an alien presence, in fact. The store owners have been asking to get out of it for 5 years. Their letters are ignored. They don't have a vote, and the price of being trapped has just gone up. And now the meaning of business includes new apartment buildings that I think you won't be surprised to know that the people who put this particular bid together were involved in upzoning, so that by the time the bid opened up, which was at the end of 2008, these apartment buildings were coming in, and now they are being assessed by the bid, and of course the store owners' fees are attached to them, and they're rising, and they have no voice at all. And I do, again, I'm being repetitive, but I do think the intentions were good, but it's all gone astray, and it's kind of just floating out there, and it seems to be free money that nobody knows about.
You two decide who's first.
I'll yield to Mr. Thacker. He's younger than I am.
I'm sorry. No, probably not.
I backed you 4 years ago.
A couple of things quickly. I appreciate what you're saying concerning bids. Bids, we may want to look at that. I tell you the truth, the approval process bids go through is short of ULURP. When a business improvement district is proposed, the community board receives a presentation.
Right. If I confuse that, they're two different issues.
No. I know it's two different
issues.
They
don't go through
but I'm saying that we may want to look at bids, because that is the only process right now. They go to a community board, and then they come to the council. They have to go to the council, but the community process is basically a bid with SBS, Small Business Services, going to the community board, making a presentation, and then the community board will issue an advisory recommendation. That's basically the process on a local level. On the other issue you mentioned, community boards are the vehicle for local input under the city charter now. They are the vehicle for people to have input into a process. I think the frustration is that community boards do give input. Sometimes you may agree or not agree, but they're frustrated because their input is advisory in nature, and they can be overridden. Government, on the other side, looks at community boards and say, well, if you have a NIMBY attitude, as Councilman Lander mentioned, some people are NIMBY, that means that no one's going to want any facilities of any type or any growth of any type if you say NIMBY, but somewhere else is okay, not here. So I think that those of us in government have to reconcile the two. How do we reconcile giving better input to local neighborhoods, but also not having a NIMBY attitude? I'd appreciate any thoughts you have on that.
Well, before I forget, what I really wanted to leave you with is that the bid legislation is undemocratic, and my suggestion, my hope, is that there could be built in some sort of an escape hatch whereby if a bid isn't working for the people who are in it. And, I'm not even saying that every small business owner should have a voice. I know there are good bids, and the store owners who just happen to be caught up in them like them. So, not having an initial voice, I don't think is so critical, although I think it's good, but having no way out, no mechanism, you are trapped. And it's my understanding, and maybe Commissioner Albanese knows better, I think that you cannot dissolve a bid unless the same people who are the landowners vote it out, which is probably not going to happen. But I think there's some sort of provision that if a bid goes into debt, it cannot be resolved either, which is kind of upside down.
Well, until the debt is paid.
Right.
A way out is what I hope I've left you with.
I thank you for your excellent testimony, and I think you hit on one of the key issues with this commission will be tackling, the broad issue, which is I'm old enough to remember why bids came into effect. And, now we're 30, 40 years into it. And what the charter we should be doing is looking at this and saying, that those conditions don't exist anymore. So let's review this whole process. Is it still worthwhile? How do we modify it? I mean, that's what the
Abe Bean
thrust.
is not the president. The mayor.
That's right. I got laid off then. I remember it well. So I applaud you because I think that's really what the thrust. That's what we should be doing.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Commissioner Albanese basically said what I was going to say, so.
I thought you ladies were fabulous.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So,
I'm not going to try to write it again. I struggle and struggle. I thought I don't have to be good, but
it's recorded.
Thank you so much.
Could I just say that, like Sal is saying, it's time to reevaluate these things that were written many, many years ago. Conditions have certainly changed. New York is not a struggling city deeply in debt. So situations have changed, so the rules need to change. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Hagan and Ms. Katine. Next, Catherine Gray from the League of Women Voters. Is she here? Okay. And Ebony Lewis. Is she here? Okay. Ms. Gray?
Okay. Hello, my name is Catherine Gray, and I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters of the City of New York. The League of Women Voters is a multi-issue, nonpartisan political organization. We encourage informed and active participation in government, work to increase understanding of major policy issue, and influence public opinion through advocacy. We congratulate you all on being named to this wonderful commission. We're looking forward to seeing the results. And this is the first commission convened by the City Council, so congratulations. The League, along with other good government groups like citizen unions and Reinvent Albany, have identified 4 areas which we think the commission should look at: open government and transparency, ethics, elections, government efficiency, and accountability. Today, sorry, my voice is going. Today, I will introduce the initiatives on voting reform that the League of Women Voters of the City of New York and New York State agree on. We believe that this will increase voter turnout and avoid some of the chaos that could be seen at the polls this past Thursday. One, the state basically requirements would be early voting, election day registration, automatic voter registration, no excuse absentee voting, and single June primaries. The cities would concentrate on improved ballot design, electronic poll book, and instant runoff voting. The New York City League monitors the Board of Elections Commission every Tuesday at 1:30. We also support the recommendations made by the New York City Department of Investigation, which was put out in December of 2013. We also support the recommendations made by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission and the work that the City Council, Ben Kalos, has done on his Committee on Government Operation, who has spent many hours grilling and trying to get the Board of Elections to comply with some of the recommendations from those following reports. I have an attachment. I will have to send this to you electronically. But thank you for the opportunity, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Jimmy, Allison, Carl.
Just quickly, I thank you for your recommendations on election reform. I would hope that I would ask that our staff give us a paper on what we could consider and what we may not be able to consider because we may be precluded by state legislation.
Correct.
But many of you recommend the same-day registration, the instant runoff. I'm glad you support. We heard testimony from Councilman Lander on that. Automatic absentee. I would just ask the staff to see what we can do and let us know legally, and then we would consider whatever we can do. But you want to elaborate at all?
Well, the improved ballot design, electronic poll books, and instant runoff are under the city. The rest of the recommendations would take cooperation with the state. No excuse absentee.
So you have the answer. So we are precluded from the absentee. We are precluded from the
no
same-day
excuse.
registration.
Yes.
We're precluded.
Yep. But there is some really interesting things in the election law that they don't follow. Is that you have to register 25 days before an election, get your voter registration. In the election law, it says 10 days.
What I wanted to ask you is something interesting that you just said, that we're precluded by state law. But if we have a special election in the city of New York, which we probably are going to have a special election for public advocate in March, as I mentioned before, since that is only a city election, are we precluded from doing same-day registration on that day?
I believe so.
Really, even though it's only a city election, nothing state is on the ballot.
I believe so.
Okay.
I will look it up, but I think the laws on voter registration are pretty strict in the election law, and the Board of Elections in the city does follow strictly what's in the election law, and they claim that they're only an administrative arm of the New York State election law, and not necessarily.
Jimmy?
I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Allison, and then Carl, and then Sal.
Thank you.
Allison is next.
My
Then
question was
Carl.
answered, asked and answered. So.
Okay. Allison?
So you actually touched on my question towards the end of your last answer, which is the role of the actual City Board of Elections in election law reform and implementation. And I'm just curious, I don't actually know, and this is something maybe the staff can elaborate on, what of the structure of the City Board of Elections is controlled by the city charter and what is handed down by state law. But I don't know if you have a sense. It strikes me that a lot of the reforms, both electronic poll book, even improved ballot design, will be somewhat useless if the entire function of the City Board of Elections doesn't dramatically improve and the quality of work that the Board of Elections doesn't dramatically improve. And so I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, the Department of Investigation, which was done in 2013 under Rose Gilhern, had a lot of recommendations and frustrations with the partisanship, nepotism, and the lack of civil service job postings. Ben Kalos's committee has gone through that too, the same measures. The U.S. Electronic Election Commission also recommended that there's problems that can be fixed as an administrative, but they don't really consider themselves part of the mayor's, under the mayor's control.
So just one quick follow-up, maybe. I believe the City Council at least has advise and consent for a Board of Elections Commission appointments, because I remember there was some controversy last year or something. So it would be just helpful for the staff could pull together sort of what role the charter has in overseeing the board, if that's possible. Thank you.
Just to follow up on what Commissioner Hirsch just asked, I think I know the answer to this. Is it possible that we could set up a nonpartisan Board of Elections in the city where you move around? Right now, it's all structured through party leaders.
You no.
I guess
no, the answer is no, because
we're preempted.
It's part of the New York State setup. We're a closed primary state.
But
I mean, when we can do instant runoff for the three basic, the mayor, the public advocate, and the controller, pretty easily.
Is it mandated that the commissioners of the Board of Elections must be appointed by the party hierarchy of the different parties that obviously that's in the law?
No, I don't. It's by precedent, at least, if it isn't in the law. Do you know how big the election law is?
Oh, I know.
Yeah, we can look more into this, and the staff will do so.
I've asked the staff to research it. So.
The biggest problem I have with the election law is that there is law for the paper ballot, which was 1950, and the new machine, which was the lever. And right now they take out from those sections of the law what they figure should be applied. There is not a real election law that is created specifically for the scanner.
Yeah. It seems to me that one could make a very good public policy argument that something as important as the Board of Elections should not be a partisan vehicle for
Have you ever heard
running
elections
elections.
have consequences?
Yes, but I'd
Yeah,
be
but
interested.
right now the commissioners are the top two parties that get the votes in New York State, and they get equal representation. There's one commissioner from the Democratic and Republican Party from each of the 5 boroughs.
We know them well.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ebony Lewis?
Hello, my name is Ebony Lewis. I am the founder of My Pitbull's Keeper. I'm here to talk about New York City ACC. I know you heard a little bit about it earlier. I'm here to go into detail for you guys. I am a dog trainer. I've been working with dogs for over 6 years now, and I have been advocating against New York City ACC for the past 6 months since I adopted my dog from death row from them. They are a shelter that has been founded on lies. They say they are a humane shelter when they are not. And I know our fellow speaker brought it up earlier today where he said that the High Kill Shelter and comparing it to Austin, Texas. Now, that is my biggest problem with ACC, and as New York residents, that should be your biggest problems as well, because ACC literally takes these dogs in from our public when you can't take care of your dog, it's a stray dog or something of that matter, and it gives it 18 hours. 18 hours this dog has from the minute it walks through these doors and gets admitted into the shelter to find a home. 18 hours when we have 3 facilities for these animals. I personally go into these shelters, specifically Manhattan ACC, undercover, and I videotape the open cages, the conditions of the dogs, the conditions of what the staff is doing, and I've personally gone in there hours before because at 6 o'clock is when the killing starts. I've gone in there hours before and I have seen 12, 13, up to 20 cages open. And then the next night, I'm putting up RIP photos for 4 dogs. When you have 13, 14, 15 cages open, that's completely unacceptable. That's completely unacceptable. That's strike 1. Strike 2, when you humanely euthanize an animal, they are labeling these dogs, specifically bully breeds. Like I said, I'm a dog trainer. I specifically work with pit bulls, and that is what they are mainly targeting. They have killed puppies, 2-month-old, 7-month-old puppies. You're telling me that nobody in New York State would want a puppy? 7-month-old puppies are being killed, and how they are being killed is completely unacceptable because ACC is run by the health department and not its own separate animal welfare. They give these dogs no anesthesia. They just give them the drug that stops their heart. That is not ethical at all. If you're going to be a kill shelter, you should do it right. But because it's under all these laws, it is not necessary to always give the anesthesia. Anesthesia is only administered when it's necessary, and it's only deemed by them. That's not regulated. There have been countless volunteers that will come to me because the volunteers are terrified to even speak out against ACC. They have a gag order on all staff and all volunteers, where if you speak out, you're kicked out, you can no longer volunteer, you're blacklisted, and you can't even adopt from ACC. I personally got blacklisted by ACC. I don't understand how that happens when I am a dog trainer. I've worked with dogs for 6+ years, and I got blacklisted by a shelter when I've offered free training, my professional training for free, and it has been denied. That is unacceptable as a shelter when all of a sudden you're saying these dogs have behavioral issues. But I've worked with multiple of these dogs that have been pulled by New Hope Rescues, because New Hope Rescues pull 99% of these dogs that they say their adoption rate, they claim to be 100%, 99%, I'm sorry. But most of these 99%, because they also group placing these dogs with outside rescues as being adopted. That's just not true. These rescues, because again, I work with a lot of these, I'm hired by a lot of these rescues, and I see the behind the scenes stuff that a lot of these people do not see. I see countless people trying to reserve one dog in 18 hours, and they're in 3 states over saying, I'm willing to drive 200 miles, but can you give me another day? Can you give me one more day? And ACC does not. And then the next day that dog is dead. But yet you have the space. If you didn't have the space, I could understand that. I've gone to shelters down south where they put 3-4 dogs into a cage trying not to kill these dogs. But yet, New York City's greatest shelter that's paid with our tax dollars has up to 30+ cages open, and you're still killing 4+ dogs a day and then claiming you're a good shelter. That's unacceptable. And as New York City, we need to come together and change this. Seriously.
Thank you. Can I just ask, Ms. Lewis, are you suggesting that there be a separate department, or that the contract that the city now uses with ACC should be re-examined or done differently?
I think that both need to be done. If the department cannot be done in enough time, then the rules, what they have now, need to be changed immediately. Because while you debate, while you talk, while you mull over the rules, dogs are dying. Today, there are 13 dogs on the list. Today. Probably 3 of them probably died already today. But yet, I'm here talking so their deaths are not in vain. I propose you need people like rescuers. You need the New Hope Rescuers as the head people. You need behaviorists, dog trainers, professional trainers in this shelter. The people evaluating these dogs don't even have backgrounds in dog training or behavior. The people giving these dogs mislabeled evaluations are culinary students. They didn't go through 6 years, 3 years of training. They didn't shadow a professional trainer for years at a time. They're just thrown into this because they're dog people. And they mislabel these animals. And this mislabeling is killing these dogs. And that needs to be stopped.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Are there any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Lewis. And Ms. Gray. Thank you. I have Curtis and Nancy Sliwa next. I think they're the people in the red beret. Nancy?
Hi. Okay, thank you. Good evening. My name is Nancy Sliwa, and I'm here speaking on behalf of introducing an independent animal welfare agency. I'm the director of Guardian Angels Animal Protection Program. I have over a decade of experience working with homeless animals and cat colonies that I've set up, and I'm also running for Attorney General on the Reform Party line with an animal platform. And I just won the primary last week, so I think that speaks volumes for what the electorate is interested in, what their issues of importance are. So in terms of the independent agency, I absolutely think that you need to remove from the equation the Department of Health. They really have no business overseeing animal welfare. Also, animal care and control contract should be rescinded. You have plenty of groups out there who can easily come in and do the work. Right now, they're on the verge of giving them a 34-year renewal contract based on an incredibly atrocious record for the 20-plus years that they've been in charge. Hundreds of thousands of healthy, adoptable animals have been killed on their watch, and they continue to inflate their own success while simultaneously handing off the responsibility and the cost to other agencies and other people who actually know how to do the job. And at this point, almost every single animal, if it wasn't sick when it came in, it's leaving sick. That's how bad a job they do at actually caring for these animals. And it's not a money issue. Last year they were funded over $20 million in revenue, with unfortunately 70% of that going to salary. The issue is that they have no targeted plan of action to actually address the problem. There's no benefit to them to actually solve the problem, because that's actually what's keeping their contract in line. So 2 examples of what sort of synchronicity that you could have if you have a singular agency that's overseeing it in a little bit 2 vastly different concepts. I have 3 women who I've been assisting the past month or so who live in Washington Heights in the same residence for over 45 years, and they've taken it upon themselves to care for and spay and neuter the cats that were living in their particular apartment basement area. They've done that successfully, spending their own time, their money, and the landlord, fantastically was actually okay with it for so long, but recently got a fine from the Department of Health because there was plates of food outside in the landlord's area, which he had already permitted that to be. He got a $300 fine, and now as a result of that, told her, I'm not going to allow you to feed them anymore because I can't take a chance with that. You can't have the same agency in charge of overseeing animal welfare that's simultaneously punishing people who are doing it the right way. That to me is a conflict of interest. And just one really quick point in terms of a recent animal abuse case that came to light in the paper. A woman had hoarded a number of animals. She wound up being taken to court. It took a year and a half, 39 court appearances. 12 of the animals were instantaneously euthanized. She could have faced up to 8 years in jail. They only gave her 3 months of probation. And 2 months later, when a city official came to inspect her apartment, she had 16 more animals and decided that she also wanted to push this state person down the stairs because she was getting agitated that this person was there. Everyone knows that animal abuse leads to abuse of people. Had you addressed that, had it been addressed rather, more seriously when it was viewed as just an animal crime, then you might not have crimes against people. Connection is very clear. It's there. And also the Animal Abuse Registry. it says that people can't purchase an animal for up to 5 years, which is way too short, absolutely. But it also says a person can't live in a residence where an animal resides, and yet this public database is not public. You have to be a shelter, you have to be part of a police force. The public can't access it, so how can you expect the public to know who to keep out of their homes if they don't even know who the animal abusers are? Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Questions? Curtis.
Thank you for your time. This is the place I used to go to school when it was Brooklyn Prep to Jesuit High School, and they decided to kick me to the curb in my senior year, 1972. Eventually it converted to Medgar Evers. And now I've been able to reverse the roles, because I've been able to kick a lot of politicians to the curb because I'm a little El Jefe. I'm a little big party chief. You know, I'm not like Crowley or Frank Sedio or Frank McKay. I'm the small type. I'm the New York State chairman of the Reform Party. And boy, has that been an eye-opening experience about the corrupt ways of politics. And I'm here to speak to all of you why I want to put myself out of business. Non-partisan elections is the way to go, so that you don't have to come and kiss my tuchus to beg to get on the Reform Party line to run, and then you know what the quid pro quo is. What can I do for you? If you're going to help me, you scratch my belly, I scratch yours. Well, we know with Crowley and Sedio and Frank McKay, it comes down to the schiarol, the money, because that's what politics has become. But it's interesting because when we went through the mayoral cycle, and I was initially the chairman, it was interesting. Sal, who's on your Charter Revision Commission here, is a true reformer. He had reform stamped on his forehead. He shouldn't have had to come to us and kiss my tuchus and the rest of the members for the line. But Paul Massey, you remember Paul? I'm a millionaire Massey. He bought the Republicans, he bought the Conservatives, he bought the Independence Party line. The guy couldn't chew gum and think at the same time. I asked him, what do you think about term limits? What do you think about, nonpartisan election? What do you think about initiative and referendum? He looked to his campaign manager. What do I think about that? Oh, no, I'm in favor of it. The Reform Party is in favor of it. And this guy was able, if he stood the whole 9 yards, to buy himself onto the line. Why not nonpartisan elections? I don't care. Let everybody run. Now, it was mentioned here before. We may have a public advocate special election coming up if Tish James becomes the next state attorney general. The smart money boys say the over-under the point spread is she's going to be the next state attorney general. I get 2 calls today from people I haven't heard from in a month of Sundays. Quite frankly, I don't like them. They don't like me. So they asked me, hey, I'm thinking of running for public advocate if Tish James gets elected attorney general. I said, oh, that's interesting. I need your help. Well, why do you need my help? Well, I want the Reform Party support. I said, hey, schmuck, no make that putz. It's a nonpartisan election. You don't need any line. All you got to do is stand out in the rain, let's say at 86th Street on the R train, get yourself about 3,750 valid signatures, and you're good to go. You can run against anybody. He said, you're kidding. I can do that. I said, you don't need us. It's better this way. And why not have nonpartisan elections the norm? And this way, if all of a sudden you have 40, 50 people running, okay, it becomes an instant runoff where you rank your choices. And then maybe the top 4 get into the final election. Instead of having primaries in June and then in September and then a general election in November, you will actually cut the course of elections and let the best men and best women vie for the position. And get rid of the Curtis Lewas, the Joe Crowleys, the Frank Sedios, the Frank McKays, and all the other big mockers who are the shot callers who determine who's going to get the line. There are good Democrats, good Republicans, there are good other party members out there who are never given the chance to run. But are you going to tell me party affiliation is important? When I see, well, there's Charles Barron, Assemblyman, and then there's outgoing Dov Hikind, Assemblyman. What the hell do they have in common? They're not even the same kind of Democrats. And yet they say, oh, but with Democrats, you got to have Democrats. No, you don't. Nonpartisan elections is the way to go. It'll be cheaper. It promotes democracy. And quite frankly, whether you're a homeless person or a billionaire, you'll have an opportunity to run. The rules will apply to everybody equally, which they don't right now.
Thank you, Mr. Sliwa. Are there questions?
He's a tough act to follow. No, thank you for your testimony. And as you know, nonpartisan elections are the norm in a lot of other cities, Chicago, L.A., and so on and so forth, San Francisco. Thank you for your thoughtful testimony.
And it should be citywide, all elections. So not just, as I heard previously from the councilman, maybe the top 3 citywide position. No, every election. Because this way you give people an opportunity to run. And then let the people
What's
decide.
What's interesting is we do it. We do it for special elections, and so it's not like something that New York City hasn't experienced.
Well, if you ask Gifford Miller, how did he become a councilman? Special election, nonpartisan election. Christine Quinn, Jimmy Otto, let me see, Matteo, Borelli. I can go right on down the list. These are key people who were in council or became Speaker of the Council who made their political bones by running in a nonpartisan election for a vacated seat. So if they could do it, why can't we have everybody do it? It's good for the process.
You know where the opposition is going to come from.
Excuse me?
You know where the opposition is going to come from.
Oh, yeah, all the parties, including bosses like me who say, what, you want to cut us out of the action here? No way.
Anybody else? Thank you very much, and thank you for staying.
Appreciate
Good to see you
it.
again.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thanks for having me back to my old high school.
I think you should speak to the fathers. The last 2 slips I have are for Brandy Flores and Judith Lustgarten.
Well, it's past my bedtime, and I left my testimony at home. So I'm going to do the best that I can do. My name is
That's it.
Judith Lustgarten, and I'm here to also speak about the OHACC animal control. Now, this business has really never gotten acknowledged as the business that it is. There are proper people to run every business that exists in this world. Yet, somehow or other, this has not happened with the animals. This business has been swept under the carpet. Scott Stringer did a scathing report on audit in 2015, swept under the carpet. I would think that responsibly, what should have been done would have been to give ACC time to cure and then come in and do another audit to see how they've done. Anyway. In any successful business, and I'm a businesswoman, a numbers person, a systems person, you put the proper people in the proper position with the proper plan, most importantly, the proper motivation, choice, and intent. And my back's going out. Oh, okay. New York should be the leaders.
You can stand if it helps you.
I'm sorry?
If you want to stand instead, just
I
take the
might
mic
have
up.
to. Well, I'm getting too old. I just had a birthday on Saturday, and I don't
Congratulations.
Want to... Yeah, I can't quite
Take
believe
the mic
it.
out of the...
Yeah. All right. Now, New York should be the leaders, and yet we are so far behind ethically, humanely. We are the furthest thing from being a no-kill shelter. Austin, Texas is the finest no-kill shelter in our country. ACC actually discredited them in a meeting with the politicians on January 16th saying they are not no-kill. They send their animals to outside facilities where they can be and are killed. We speak to Austin, Texas. If I tell you they were livid that this was said, and actually Risa Weinstock, President CEO of the ACC, was calling them every day. They said to us, boy, there's an awful lot of activity going on in New York. We said, oh, really? Why? What are you talking about? They said, our phone hasn't stopped ringing. Oh, really? Why? Who's calling? Risa Weinstock. She was backpedaling, trying to do damage control for what she had said, which was not the truth. They tell many untruths. They discredit the advocates. They do a wonderful sugar and spice horse and pony show. Oh dear, already? I have so much to say, and I don't. And unfortunately, like I said, I left my notes at home. But they've got an 18-hour kill list that comes out at 6 p.m. at night. The advocates go into panic mode every night at 6 o'clock, and they have less than a day. They have 18 hours, 12 o'clock in the afternoon the following day, and these animals are now chosen to who is going to be killed. It is a crazy, crazy, convoluted system. They're completely hands-off. The advocates are doing all of the work. The rescues are doing all of the work. I have never seen any, I am such a hands-on person, I have never seen anything function in such a hands-off manner. These people are being paid by our tax dollars, and we're doing their work for free. Advocates all over the world are vying for our animals, from the UK, Australia, Holland, Italy. The Italian Senator Carlo Rocchi sent a video plea to de Blasio, which I have no doubt he never saw, saying, your shelters are vile. We have a horrid, horrid reputation.
Ms. Lustgarten, can I ask you a quick question? Are you suggesting that there be a separate and new independent agency?
It definitely needs to be spun out of the Department of Health. If you look up Mario Merlino in the Department of Health, it comes up veterinary and pest control. Those two words don't belong in the same title, but they are. And these animals are considered a disposable commodity. They're just not thought of as the sentient beings that they actually are. And as a business person, you know, proper people in the proper position with the proper plan and motivation. They've got writers, publishers, attorneys. I have nothing against attorneys. My father was a judge and a U.S. attorney. They need qualified business, admin, marketing, animal professionals. Sure, have an in-house attorney or so, but not running the organization. It's not about liability. It's about saving these animals' lives and putting the right people in there to run this business. It's a business like every other business that exists. They need the right people to be a part of it. It's not happening. And one thing I know about, and my great-uncle was U.S. Ambassador of Siam and Bolivia. One thing I know about is integrity, professionalism, and responsibility. And it is not happening with this institution.
Thank you very much, Ms.
I have so much more to say, but okay.
Well, if you'd like to write it down and send it to us, or you can just go on our website and send it to us. You said you left it, your testimony at home. You can certainly send it to us.
I don't want to overwhelm all of you because there are so many tentacles to this. There are a lot of tentacles, and they each run very deeply. It's very, very convoluted. They've got 3 ag-gag contracts between every employee and the DOH, between ASPCA and ACC. By the way, spay, neuter, and kill. They spay, they're sent to ASPCA, they are spayed or neutered with subsidized money, delivered back to the disease-riddled shelter, and killed within days, sometimes the following day. And please, please tell me who with a grain of humanity would put a poor defenseless animal through that kind of an operation only to be killed perhaps the following day. And we have the list. And they lied to Tony Avella when he wrote to them. They lied and said, he asked about one animal. They said it was an anomaly. We showed him a list of 80 animals they've done this to. It is not an anomaly. And they're killing these poor defenseless animals after putting them through a surgery with subsidized dollars.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for caring.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to testify whose name I have not called? Hearing none, I'd like to thank everyone for attending and sharing your thoughts and ideas with us, and I encourage you to continue to do so throughout this process. Remember to visit our website, charter2019.nyc, and you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at charter2019nyc. Our next hearing will be this coming Thursday, September 20th at 6 p.m. in Queensborough Hall. Commissioners, while you're more than welcome to take the written materials with you, and I urge you to do so, please remember to leave your folders and name cards behind so that we may use them again at the next hearing. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed?
No.
The motion carries. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Oh, you left it? Oh, good. Oh, you put it in there?
Yeah, I think it's we've had two good hearings. Those are the people who didn't speak.
Nice job.
Thank you.
You were great.
It's all
Thursday.
That's right in front. Oh, no.
I know that's what she said. You know that's the story.